Welcome to the Arctic Luna, a werewolf-fated mate romance, where fate is messy, the sparks are wild, and the full moon brings more than fur and fangs. There's snark, steam, and a mate bond neither of them asked for, but can't escape. Buckle up, pack. From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you'll find stories here that pull you in and don't let go. If you're into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you're in the right place. TM Nyxen, Audiobooks. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. Content advisory. This audiobook contains strong language, adult themes, and scenes of violence. Listener discretion is advised. The scent of pine needles and dust hung thick in the morning air, clinging to Devin's clothes as if they, too, were reluctant to leave. It wasn't just a smell. It was a layered tapestry of scents that told the story of the cabin itself. The sharp, clean bite of fresh pine from recently swept floorboards, overlaid with the earthier, almost sweet decay of years of dust motes dancing in sunbeams. She stood in the center of her late grandfather's cabin, her fingers brushing over a carved wooden picture frame one of those old ones where you could still smell the varnish if you pressed your nose close. The wood was smooth and cool beneath her fingertips, worn by countless brushes over the decades. The picture inside was crooked, a faded snapshot of a boisterous family barbecue where her grandfather, a younger, thicker version of himself, was caught mid-laugh, a streak of barbecue sauce on his chin. She left it that way. He liked things imperfect. "Don't mind the mess, honey." She could almost hear him chuckle from the beyond, his voice a gravelly rumble that reverberated deeper than just her ears, settling in the hollow of her chest. It means the place was lived in. The cabin hadn't changed much since his passing a month ago to the day. Dust, fine and a little gritty, crept over the windowsills like frost, obscuring the view of the compound beyond. Books, their pages brittle and yellowed, piled haphazardly on the armrest of his worn, faded leather reading chair, emitting the faint, comforting aroma of aged paper and forgotten stories. The cushions of the armchair still held the ghost of his form, a slight indentation where he'd spent countless evenings, a well-worn flannel, soft with age and carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice, hung on the back of the front door, swaying almost imperceptibly with the subtle currents of the cabin, like it was still waiting to be shrugged on. Devin pressed her face into it, inhaling deeply, a sharp ache flowering behind her ribs. She'd spent the last 2 days sorting through his things, each object a portal to a memory. Some she kept a stack of old letters tied with string, brittle as autumn leaves, the cool, smooth weight of his silver pocket watch, its ticking a slow, steady pulse against her palm, and one very stubborn cast-iron skillet, seasoned over generations, still smelling faintly of bacon and his legendary campfire stew. The rest? Packed in cardboard boxes labeled simply donate or recycle, though each one felt like severing another tie. But it wasn't just sorting and boxing. It was crying, hot tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks as she found a childish drawing she'd given him, now tucked into the front of an old atlas. It was laughing, a sudden, surprising burst, when she unearthed a battered deck of cards and remembered their endless, cheating games of rummy. It was whispering to shadows, articulating silent goodbyes to the echoes of his booming laugh and quiet wisdom that still lingered in the corners of the room. It was listening to echoes, the wind rattling the panes, sounding uncannily like his footsteps across the pine floor. Closure. At least a version of it that came with tears and bad coffee, brewed strong and bitter on his antique percolator. A ray of late morning sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating swirling motes of dust in the air like tiny luminescent spirits. Devin sat on the faded leather couch, the rough texture of the fabric, a familiar comfort, a dog-eared copy of his favorite adventure novel open on her lap, though she hadn't read a word. Her joints were sore from kneeling and lifting, her heart a little less raw, a faint hum of exhaustion thrumming beneath her skin. She rose, joints protesting with soft pops, and resolved to burn off the ache, the grief, the pervasive emptiness, the only way she knew how: training. The compound's training grounds were a sacred space, a place where pain met purpose, where sweat and blood were offerings to growth. The punching bags, scarred and scuffed, groaned under impact. The dirt was hard-packed, permeated with the scent of damp earth and exertion. Every scar on this soil had a story of effort, of discipline, of pushing boundaries. Devin, dressed in a dark tank top and form-fitting leggings, rolled her shoulders, inhaling the crisp, cool air. She started with shadow boxing, her movements fluid and economical, a dancer's grace paired with a warrior's power. Then she faced the heavy bag, throwing a jab that cracked against the worn leather like a firecracker. Left, right, front kick, the impact vibrating up her leg. Again, the rhythmic thwack thump whish of her strikes filled the air, the only sound apart from her ragged breath. 20 minutes in, and her muscles were singing a bittersweet chorus of ache and release. The air was thick with morning fog, a pearlescent veil hanging low over the field, mingling with the metallic tang of her sweat. Her mind, usually a chaotic whirlwind of thought, was blissfully empty, consumed by the rhythm of her body. Then, between strikes, as she pulled back from a particularly vicious cross, she felt it. Not saw, not heard. Felt. A shiver, primal and unwelcome, slid down her spine like a cold drop of water. It was a sensation of being watched, sharp and intrusive, like glass shards under her skin. She turned mid-combo, just enough, her body instinctively responding before her mind registered the threat. Two figures stood at the misty edge of the field, partially obscured by the lingering fog. One she knew, Alpha Garrick, stoic, proud, a man whose presence commanded respect, silver creeping into his neatly trimmed beard like frostbite. He was speaking, his gestures slow and measured. The other was taller, broader, a veritable giant whose frame seemed to absorb the light around him, making him appear like a shadow made corporeal. Black hair was cropped close to his scalp. Dressed in all black, from his heavy boots to his long-sleeved shirt, arms crossed over a chest that seemed impossibly wide, he stood utterly still, unmoving as a statue carved from obsidian. And his eyes, even from this distance, felt like a physical weight. They were locked on her like she was a puzzle he already knew the pieces to but wanted to watch her figure it out anyway. His gaze was unblinking, an unsettling intensity that spoke of predatory focus, not casual observation. He didn't smile, didn't blink. Hell, he didn't even flinch when the bag cracked behind her with another powerful kick, just stared, unreadable and relentless. Devin's breath hitched. She met his gaze for a second too long, a strange coil of awareness tightening in her gut, and looked away first, cursing herself for the unconscious submission. Alpha showing him around? She reasoned aloud, the words a thin shield against the knot of pure instinct tightening inside her. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, forcing herself to focus on the heavy bag again. Big guy like that? Military or enforcer type? A new face, that's all. Nothing more. Still, her gut twisted with something that didn't have a name. Not fear, not precisely. More like a primal awareness, a jolt of recognition she couldn't place, an unmoored energy that felt both alien and strangely, terrifyingly familiar. By the time Devin dragged herself back to her cabin, the sun had climbed high enough to steam the morning dew from the grass, and the fog had burned away. Her muscles screamed in delicious protest, a good, clean ache after the emotional turmoil of the past few days. She peeled off her sweat-soaked tank top, tossing it into a laundry hamper, and headed toward the bathroom for a much-needed shower. She paused in the living room, stretching out a sore hamstring, her breath still a little ragged. That's when the knock came. Firm, measured. 3 sharp raps that reverberated through the cabin's quiet wood, and followed by a voice, deep, even, and devoid of warmth, just outside the door. The Alpha wants to see you. In his den. Not your Alpha, just the Alpha. The pronoun shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet somehow it made all the difference. It wasn't a request from her trusted leader. It was a summons from a reigning authority. Devin blinked at the door, her heart kicking up a beat, muscles still warm from training, and now tensing for something else entirely. A prickle of unease, far sharper than the earlier one at the training grounds, feathered across her skin. The Alpha never summoned anyone without a reason. And this reason, she instinctively knew, had something to do with the giant in black and the unsettling pull of his stare. Devin's boots barely made a sound against the aged hardwood floors of Alpha Garrick's lodge, yet her heartbeat thundered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat against the unsettling quiet. Each beat felt like a countdown, a premonition of something significant, something irreversible about to unfold. His den was just as she remembered it, perhaps even more so now, as if the air itself had grown heavier with the passage of time and secrets. The scent was a thick, complex tapestry, the deep, comforting aroma of aged oak from the sturdy beams and expansive bookshelves that lined every wall, mingled with the earthy, rich perfume of cured leather from the armchairs and well-worn desks. Underlying it all was the persistent, smoky tang of the fire from the hearth, a whisper of burnt wood and lingering ash, a scent that usually brought her a sense of peace, but now seemed to prickle at her senses, sharp and foreboding. Books, countless volumes, stood like silent, imposing guards, their spines a testament to forgotten wisdom and untold stories. The fireplace, a low, watchful eye of glowing embers in the corner, cast dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. But something was fundamentally different this time. Wrong. She stepped inside, pausing just past the threshold, and immediately clocked the change that had set her instincts on edge. The quiet wasn't just physical. It was a deeper, more profound stillness, as if the very air had ceased to move in anticipation. There were 3 men in the room. One seated him, the monolithic stranger from the training field, Kai. He sat in a broad, overly ornate leather armchair that looked laughably inadequate, as if it had been personally offended by his sheer, imposing presence. His shoulders, broad as barn doors, strained the seams of his black shirt, which stretched taut across his formidable chest. His arms were folded, a gesture of absolute command, as if he owned not just the chair, but the very air, the very vibrations in the room. His expression was stone, carved from darker stone, devoid of warmth or welcome. To either side of the heavy oak door, 2 men stood like statues hewn from raw fury. These weren't just men, they were extensions of Kai's will, a palpable aura of controlled violence radiating from them. The one to the left, Nash, bore a jagged scar that ran from his temple, bisecting his eyebrow before disappearing beneath his jawline, a testament to battles fought and won. His eyes, though fixed and unblinking, seemed to miss nothing. The other, York, possessed a chilling, dead calm in his gaze, a terrifying blankness that screamed, "I've broken necks and slept like a baby after." Enforcers. She knew the type. This was not a social call. This was an inquisition, a pronouncement. Garrick, her alpha, an older man whose usual jovial demeanor was conspicuously absent, motioned toward the empty seat across from Kai. His face was etched with a weariness she'd never seen before, his eyes shadowed with an unspoken burden. "Sit, Devin." She hesitated, not from fear, not precisely. Her instincts, honed by years of living on the edge of a volatile world, screamed that this was the very moment where her life was about to irrevocably change. A tremor, subtle but significant, ran through her. She took her seat, slowly, her movements deliberate, almost defiant. As she settled, her snow-white hair, a stark contrast against the dark leather of her tunic, fell over one shoulder, catching the faint, ruddy glow from the fireplace. She'd always hated it, this singular, striking feature. It made her stand out like a beacon in a world of shadows, a target in a place where blending in was survival. Some called it beautiful, a mark of purity. Most, she knew, whispered of it being a curse. Her crystal green eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked from Nash's scarred face to York's unnervingly calm gaze, assessing, dissecting, seeking any tell. Then they landed on Garrick, who held a piece of folded parchment in his calloused, slightly trembling hand. "Before I explain anything, you need to read this." His voice was softer, far too soft, than she expected from the gruff alpha. That scared her more than the imposing men or Kai's silent intensity. He handed her the letter. Devin took it, her fingers trembling slightly. a ripple of unease turning into a tide of dread. The parchment felt thick and aged beneath her fingertips, releasing a faint scent of old paper and something else, something familiar but unplaceable. She opened it with the deliberate precision of someone defusing a bomb, knowing that whatever lay within could detonate her world. The handwriting was immediately sickeningly familiar. Her grandfather's looping, confident script, a hand that had guided her own as a child, now delivered a final, devastating blow from beyond the grave. Her eyes scanned the words, at first with detached curiosity, then with dawning horror, and finally with a volcanic surge of disbelief and incandescent rage. Dev, the letter began, instantly drawing her in. A cruel intimacy. If you're reading this, then I've gone to the land beyond. A small, choked sound escaped her throat, a mix of grief and confusion. Her grip on the letter tightened, knuckles turning white against the aged paper. I should have told you years ago, honey, but you are betrothed to the Alpha Chi of the Blackwind Dominion. The words slapped her, a cold, wet towel across the face. Betrothed? To him? To the silent, brooding mountain of a man sitting across from her, whose gaze seemed to burn into her very soul? Her breath hitched. The heat began to build, a slow burn in her chest. This union was arranged to ensure your protection. Protection? Her pouty lips tightened into a thin, white line. She didn't need protection. She was a warrior, trained since she could walk. This was a lie, a gilded cage masquerading as a sanctuary. I know this might come as a shock, but it is the way of our kind. You were chosen because of our bloodline. You, better than anyone, know what our bloodline carries. The Arctic wolf gene. Our kind is rare, strong, with unmatched endurance and bite force. Your union ensures that the gift continues. Trust me, this is for you and our people. The rage finally erupted. It wasn't a slow burn anymore, it was a wildfire, consuming her, leaving only ash and fury in its wake. Her grandfather, the man she had loved and admired, had sold her, like property, like a prize mare. Her bloodline, her unique gift, reduced to a bargaining chip. All for protection and the continuation of a gene she sometimes felt was more a burden than a blessing. Her hands clenched the letter so hard the edges began to tear, the delicate parchment groaning under the strain. Her breaths came in short, sharp gasps, her chest heaving. She lowered the letter slowly, her green eyes now lit with wildfire, blazing with a fury that threatened to consume everything in the room. So I'm being shipped off for breeding, Alpha. Her voice cracked like a whip in the sudden, suffocating silence of the den, each word laced with bitter venom. It was a challenge, a raw scream of betrayal. Well, fuck me sideways, that's rich. Alpha Garrick had the good sense to look profoundly uncomfortable, his eyes darting between her furious face and Kai's impassive one. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came out, only a strangled, helpless sound. But Kai didn't flinch. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his powerful knees, his gaze locked on her like she was both prey and prophecy all in one. There was no apology in his eyes, no flicker of sympathy, only absolute certainty. His voice was smooth, deep, and unapologetic, rolling over her like a heavy fog that promised to smother her in everything she knew. You, Devin, he said, the weight of mountains behind each syllable, his eyes piercing through her rage to her very core, are to be Luna. Devin stared at the torn letter in her lap, jagged edges fluttering slightly from the subtle tremble of her hands. The fine parchment, once crisp and authoritative, now felt like a cruel joke, a tangible representation of a betrayal she couldn't yet fully grasp. Her world, her home, her rhythm, her space, the very ground beneath her feet had just been auctioned off by a dead man with a good heart and appallingly bad timing. She blinked. The warm, musky scent of Garrick's den, usually so comforting, now seemed to press in on her, suffocating. Around her, the silent, watchful presences of Nash and York, enforcers of this very pack, were strangers. And in front of them all, but one Alpha Garrick, her Alpha, whose face gave away nothing but a deep, weary sadness, and the other, Kai, a dark monolith whose expression remained as unreadable as polished obsidian. My home is here, she said quietly at first, the words barely a whisper, yet they cut through the heavy silence of the den. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, oblivious to the tempest brewing within her. I have friends, my job, my life, my pack. Her gaze swept over each face, a desperate plea in her eyes that dared them to deny her. This wasn't a whim, it was the foundation of her existence. She wasn't shouting. It would have been easier if she were. No. Her voice had that quiet, razor-sharp ache behind it, the kind that makes strong men shift uncomfortably in their seats, as if the very air had turned to glass. A beat of silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Garrick's jaw tightened. Even Nash and York, normally stoic, flickered with unease. So what now? She continued, her voice gaining a dangerous edge, a tremor of building fury. I pack up my entire life and go like a good girl because Grandpa made a deal in the shadows? Because some ancient, forgotten pact dictates my future? My home is here. The last word was a declaration, a challenge thrown into the heart of the room. Garrick opened his mouth, probably to say something diplomatic and alpha-ish, words of comfort veiled in duty, but she beat him to it. The sheer indignity of it, the feeling of her autonomy being ripped away by a ghost, fueled a cold, consuming rage. She stood, slowly, carefully, every movement deliberate, as if gathering all her splintered self into one solid piece. She unfolded the letter, its presence in her hands now an affront. Her fingers found the center crease, the delicate paper feeling like a personal insult, and then, with a sneer of pure, unadulterated betrayal, she tore it straight down the center. The sharp rip shattered the silence, a physical manifestation of her defiance. Grandfather, she said, her voice rising, loud enough to rattle the whiskey glasses on the shelf, the framed hunting trophies on the walls. You sly old bastard! The words hung in the air, audacious and utterly disrespectful. There was a beat of stunned silence that stretched taut as a bowstring. Nash blinked, his jaw slack. York choked on something that might have been a barely stifled laugh, a cough escaping his lips. Even Kai's stony expression broke for a half-second, his lips curled in the ghost of a smirk, a flicker of something akin to amusement dancing in his dark eyes before his mask resettled. Only Garrick remained unmoved, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. He cleared his throat, half amused, half exasperated by her predictable rebellion. You know she swore like a sailor by the time she was 9, he told Kai, a weary fondness in his tone. Devin, please pack lightly. Devin didn't wait for a response. She tossed the shredded paper into Garrick's roaring fireplace as if it were a dramatic period on a final, defiant sentence. The scraps of paper caught the flame, curling and blackening into nothing. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out the door, the heavy oak thudding shut behind her, leaving an echo of her fury in its wake. Kai watched her go, a strange, calculating gleam in his eye. She'll fit in nicely, he murmured to Garrick, the words a low rumble of approval. He didn't have to say more. Garrick already knew. He understood the kind of raw, untamed spirit that would thrive, or at least survive, in the Blackwind Dominion. We had a guy in training yank her braid a few months back, Garrick said, lips twitching into a half smirk. He thought it was funny. He shook his head, then glanced toward Kai. Her hair sensitive, Arctic bloodline. The nerves run deeper touching it without her say. So it was like lighting a fuse. She's always been that way. Has to do with her wolf. He chuckled, voice warming with pride. She didn't even flinch. Spun around and drop-kicked the poor bastard so hard he couldn't eat solids for 2 days. We were feeding him through a straw. Kai didn't smile. His gaze stayed steady, his jaw ticking once as he absorbed every word. Noted, he said, voice quiet but sharp. I won't touch what isn't offered. Garrick gave him a look something between impressed and respectful. She might like you, he said. Eventually, Kai chuckled, a low, dark sound that vibrated with genuine amusement. Does she always fight dirty? She fights smart, Garrick corrected, pride in his voice. And she fights back, Kai. Pint-sized, maybe, but I'm telling you she's a firecracker. Never backs down. Kai stood, his tall frame unfolding with a silent grace. He nodded to Nash. The enforcer, a shadow in his own right, moved without a sound, slipping out the door and trailing Devin like a phantom. Devin moved like a storm back in her cabin, fast, furious, and with a clear, inflexible objective. The air in her familiar space, usually so comforting, now felt charged with her indignation. Every item she looked at, every photograph on the wall, every warm blanket on her couch screamed, "Mine," and she was not, absolutely not, going to just roll over and leave it all behind. If she was being forced to leave behind everything she knew, every memory etched into these walls, she was damn sure bringing every last scented candle, every battered book, and every memory-stuffed box with her. "Pack lightly, my ass," she muttered, grunting as she chucked a stack of heavy knit sweaters into a suitcase already bursting at the seams. "I am not going to show up in their territory with just a sad little duffel bag and my pride hanging by a thread. They want me, they get all of me, baggage included." She moved with purpose, a frantic energy driving her. She boxed up everything from her vintage records, each album a portal to better times, to her grandfather's ancient hunting knife, especially the knife. She ran a thumb over the worn leather of its sheath, a tangible connection to the sly old bastard who had inadvertently thrown her life into chaos. She slid it carefully into a reinforced side pocket of her travel pack, a silent promise to herself that she would not be disarmed, physically or metaphorically. By the time Nash knocked softly on the door, a barely audible rap that still made her jump, she already had a small mountain of boxes outside, stacked precariously high at the back of Nash's huge black truck. Her hands ached, her hair piled high on her head in a messy bun, but a grim satisfaction settled over her. This was her rebellion. Kai showed up not long after, stepping out of the deepening twilight like a figure carved from the shadows themselves. He stood in the gravel like a monolith in black, his imposing presence seeming to dwarf the entire cabin. He watched her carry another heavy box toward the tailgate, his gaze sharp and assessing. His brows pulled together slightly as he stepped forward, his voice a low, gravelly sound that cut through the evening air. "What are you doing?" Devin didn't even flinch. Didn't break her stride. She kept walking, the weight of the box oddly grounding, until she was standing toe-to-toe with him, her chin tilted back to meet his gaze, a defiant spark in her eyes. The scent of pine and rich earth clung to him, the scent of the wild, and she could feel the sheer power radiating from him, a raw, untamed force. Nash and York, who had appeared soundlessly behind Kai, instinctively moved in, stepping like twin wolves ready to block an attack, their hands hovering near their belts. But Kai lifted a single hand, a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture. They froze, their instincts overridden by their alpha's command. Devin looked up at him, her chin held high, her eyes steady, unwavering. "If I'm being carted off to the Blackwind Dominion, like some kind of broodmare," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the rage swirling within her, "then I'm bringing every single piece of my damn life with me. Every memory, every possession, every scrap of who I am." She narrowed her eyes. "And since everyone suddenly thinks they get a say in my fucking life, I'm making damn sure it gets packed." Then, with a deliberate shift in tone, a note of grudging respect mingling with her fierce defiance, she added, "Alpha." And for a moment, Kai didn't see a woman being forced into a pact. He didn't see a pawn in a power play. He saw a Luna already staking a claim, not just of her possessions, but of her destiny, even when it was being ripped from her hands. He saw the fight, the pride, the untamed spirit that would make her not just survive, but thrive in his world. And a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The tires crunched over the smooth stone drive, a sound as crisp and precise as everything else Devin was beginning to see. Her breath caught in her throat. The scent of pine and damp earth, so familiar from her wild lands, here mingled with something cleaner, an almost sterile crispness that spoke of meticulous upkeep. Of all the rumor saw, the whispered stories shared around late-night bonfires, or swapped like ghost tales among young wolves, nothing had prepared her for this. Whispers of a hidden fortress, a grim stronghold carved into the mountainside, guarded by silent, imposing warriors. Whispers of a pack hardened by generations of isolation and power. The Blackwind compound didn't look like a fortress. It looked like a dream. Modern buildings stretched across the mountain crest like they were grown straight from the earth, not built. Black timber beams rose to cathedral ceilings, complementing stark stone walls that seemed to absorb the mountain's ancient wisdom. Glass, polished to an impossible sheen, shimmered like frozen rivers in the morning sun, reflecting the endless sky and the impossibly green forest beyond. Every walkway was paved with dark, polished stone, meticulously swept, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and silver-barked trees that whispered in the cool wind, their leaves rustling a gentle, almost musical welcome. The air hummed with a quiet power, a sense of order so profound it bordered on royal. It was pristine, sleek, unapologetically beautiful. Every line, every angle, every carefully placed stone spoke of power and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Her jaw went slack as the truck slowed to a stop before a wide, open archway that seemed to invite the very mountains inside. Well, shit, she muttered under her breath, the common curse feeling utterly out of place in this magnificent setting. Nash, climbing out of the driver's seat, merely gave her a knowing smirk like, "It's big, hey. That's why we call it the Dominion." He was right, of course. For once, the rumors had drastically undersold the truth. Before she could blink twice, a blur of motion zipped up to the vehicle. A petite young woman slight of frame, with dark hair pulled into a tight, almost painful-looking braid, and eyes that snapped to Devin like she just smelled trouble, or perhaps simply something disruptive to her perfectly ordered world. She didn't speak to Devin. Her gaze, sharp and assessing, went straight to Nash. Her shoulders were held stiffly, her jaw subtly clenched. "Orders?" she clipped, the word as precise as the compound's architecture. "She's to be taken to the Luna's quarters," Nash said with a nod toward the boxes in the back of the truck. "All of it." His glance at Devin was brief, an unspoken warning to the Omega to comply. The Omega's jaw ticked slightly, barely noticeable. Barely. Devin clocked it anyway. Her senses, honed by years of navigating subtle shifts in pack dynamics, picked up on the barely hidden contempt, the resentment, simmering just beneath a veneer of professional politeness. This wasn't just a new face, it was an imposition. The girl turned to her then, her expression a mask of official neutrality, but her gaze was undeniably cool, almost disdainful, as it swept over Devin's worn jeans and practical boots. "This way, Luna." Devin didn't miss the look the Omega shot her tight, lipped, annoyed, almost daring, the kind of look that said, "You don't belong here." Even if the words didn't. She arched a brow, then said just loud enough for both the Omega and Nash to hear, "Great, passive, aggressive Omegas. Just fucking peachy." The Omega's jaw twitched. Nash coughed into his fist, whether to hide a laugh or a warning, she wasn't sure. The title that followed Luna didn't land like an honor. It landed like a challenge, like a gauntlet thrown down on polished stone, daring Devin to pick it up. The word was spat, not spoken, barely veiled in its disdain. It was clear, "You are here because you have to be, and I resent it." Inside, Devin was shown to her quarters, which felt less like a bedroom and more like a luxury suite designed by a moody forest spirit. It was vast, with huge, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sweeping, misty ridge, the mountains unfolding like a bruised tapestry beneath a vast sky. The dark wood floors gleamed underfoot, covered in strategic places by plush rugs in deep forest green that felt impossibly soft beneath her worn boots. The furniture was minimal but striking. A heavy, carved bed frame with rich, dark linens, a long, low settee upholstered in dark gray velvet, and a single, ornate desk tucked into an alcove. It was as elegant as it was expensive, every piece. Speaking of understated wealth and power, Devin walked in slowly, drinking it in. The air was cool, faintly scented with cedar and something indefinable, the very smell of luxury and clean stone. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint murmur of the wind outside. It was beautiful, undeniably, but also intimidating. It was too perfect, too grand, too much like a gilded cage. It felt less like a personal space and more like a statement. Then she turned and paused. It wasn't the same Omega from before. This one was younger, quieter, her posture stiff, but not confrontational. She moved methodically, placing the first box near the bed with sharp, efficient motions, like someone used to doing a job and doing it well. Devin watched her for a beat, noting the difference. No attitude, no venom, just work. Good. She let out a slow breath and stepped further into the room. "What's your name?" Devin asked, her tone casual but pointed, a deliberate attempt to break through the rigid professionalism. The girl blinked, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at the direct address. "Tamsin." "Well, Tamsin," Devin said, deliberately dropping another box on the bed with a soft thump, letting the mundane act disrupt the room's pristine calm. "I don't bite unless someone pulls my hair. You don't need to look at me like I'm here to burn the place down." Tamsin hesitated, her shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly. Then, a flicker of something. Was it respect? Amusement? A grudging acknowledgement of Devin's directness crossed her face before she dipped her head, a practiced, almost imperceptible dip. "Noted, Luna." With that, she slipped out, her footsteps silent on the polished floor, leaving Devin in a sudden, cavernous silence. Unpacking wasn't hard. Devin was good at making strange places feel like home, a skill honed by a lifetime of adapting. Her belongings were few, but each carried weight. A framed photo of her grandfather, his eyes crinkling at the corners, was a reminder of unconditional love and the sturdy roots she came from. A worn book of poetry with the pages falling out, its spine soft from countless readings, a conduit to moments of quiet contemplation amidst chaos. The stubborn cast iron skillet she refused to leave behind, heavy and unyielding, a symbol of self-sufficiency and the simple comfort of a home-cooked meal already hanging proudly on a hook in the small, immaculate kitchenette. Her dual daggers, wrapped in a worn leather pouch, she stored in the trunk at the end of her bed. She tucked away her clothes into a massive built-in dresser, stacked her books on a low shelf, and lined up her boots with military precision near the door. It was an act of quiet defiance, of reclaiming a slice of herself in this overwhelming new environment. This was her space now, no matter how temporary or how grand. It was a small, quiet act of resolve. Then she sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed and stared out the window for a while, the vast mountain landscape a muted painting beyond the glass. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, soft but firm, a constant refrain throughout her childhood. "You were chosen, Dev. That blood of yours, that bite, you're meant for more." There was more here, more luxury, more silence, more unspoken expectations. It all pressed in around her the weight of this new life, this title she hadn't asked for. Heavy, foreign, inevitable. She blew out a breath, a silent expulsion of nerves and lingering uncertainty. Then, with a decisive shift of her shoulders, she stood up and grabbed her workout bag. Time to find the training yard. If she couldn't control her destiny, she could at least control her body. Blackwind's training field was nothing like the rough dirt patch back home where sparring often ended with scraped knees and a mouthful of grit. This place was sprawling, an open-air arena that somehow still felt contained and purposeful. It boasted an impressive array of weapon racks, gleaming blades, and polished staffs neatly arranged. A sunken, sand-filled ring sparring pit dominated one section, flanked by weighted dummies that looked like they could withstand a tectonic shift. Target boards, scored with countless impacts, stood against a far wall, while expansive mat areas beckoned for hand-to-hand combat. It was a warrior's playground, highly organized, almost sterile. Warrior's playground done. Mercifully, it was empty. Perfect. Devin stepped onto the main floor, the dark, durable material beneath her boots firm and unyielding. She dropped her bag with a soft thud that echoed slightly in the vast space, then began her warm-up. High knees, her breath coming in controlled bursts, dynamic stretches, opening her hips and shoulders, feeling the familiar pull of her muscles. Then she launched into her routine, a fluid, practiced sequence of movements that felt as natural as breathing. Memory, muscle, and instinct fused into a singular purpose. Front kicks snapped out, swift and powerful. Jab cross combos ripped through the air, each punch carrying a ghost of her grandfather's lessons. Low squat to twist, engaging her core, letting the power flow from her center. Burpees, The burn in her lungs and thighs is immediate and welcome. More kicks, precise and devastating. She moved with a raw, disciplined energy. Each movement, a release. The mountains stood silent around her like ancient sentinels, vast and indifferent. The wind cool against her sweat-slicked skin, the rhythmic thump of her boots on the floor, the whoosh of her movements, the sharp exhalation of her breath. These were the only sounds, a percussive symphony of her own making. She didn't know who might be watching. She didn't care. This was her rhythm, her fire, her fight. The confusion, the crushing weight of grief for her old life, the simmering anger at her fate, at the alpha who had claimed her without a word it, all poured into her movements. Each punch was a frustration unleashed, each kick a defiant roar. The metallic tang of sweat coated her tongue, her muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed harder, faster, driving the pain deeper, letting it become part of the fuel. The stone beneath her boots, cold and unyielding, was a constant anchor, a reminder of the solid ground she was fighting to reclaim under her own 2 feet. No titles, no alphas, no legacies. Just Devin, broken, yes, confused, absolutely, but fighting, always fighting. The days that followed Devin's arrival passed in quiet, calculated adjustment, a careful choreography of self-sufficiency. No grand tour, no alpha welcome committee, no fawning subordinates, just solitude, sharp and precise, exactly as she preferred it. It suited her wild, independent nature, confirming her suspicion that this compound, despite its opulence, was ultimately a cage, and she would define its bars. She spent the mornings on the sparring grounds, the chill of the dawn air a baptism against her skin, the metallic tang of her sweat a welcome anchor. Each strike, each parry, each breath was a declaration of strength, a silent refusal to yield any part of herself to this new unwanted reality. Afternoons were given to exploration, wandering the compound's endless, echoing halls, memorizing layouts and escape routes, not because she planned to flee, but because knowledge was power. Every stone wall, every closed door, every shadowed corner was cataloged in her mind. Evenings saw her retreat to the Luna Suite, which, despite its lavish comforts, still felt like a gilded prison cell. Her meals arrived on heavy silver trays, delivered by Omegas whose eyes darted away whenever hers met them. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was clipped and polite, as if their voices might shatter the fragile peace. The food was rich, meticulously prepared. The silence, however, was better. It allowed her thoughts to spool out, uninterrupted, to sharpen the edges of her resolve. She hadn't seen Kai once. Not a glimpse, not a passing nod in a corridor, not even a shadow stretching under a closed door. It suited her fine. She wasn't sure if he was testing her or simply didn't care, but either way, she refused to sit around like a caged pet, waiting for her master's attention. Her worth wasn't contingent on an alpha's gaze. Then, on the 4th evening, precisely as dusk bled into indigo across the vast arched windows of her suite, came the knock. Soft yet commanding. "Alpha requests your presence." Nash's voice, steady and unreadable as ever, cut through the quiet. Devin didn't flinch. Her spine remained ramrod straight as she sat at the antique writing desk. "Lead the way," she replied coolly, already reaching up to bind her long white hair into a sleek, functional tail at the nape of her neck. A warrior's knot. The Alpha's private suite was just as she expected, opulent and masculine, a fortress within a fortress. It was soaked in deep earth tones, rich leathers, and polished stone walls that seemed to absorb all light. The air inside was thick with its scent, spice, cedarwood, and the raw, undeniable essence of power that clung to everything he touched. It was a scent that had, in another lifetime, stirred something primal within her. Now it merely registered as an oppressive weight. Nash opened the heavy carved door, the sound resonating like a slow drumbeat, stepped aside, and let her walk through alone. He remained a silent sentinel, just inside the threshold. Devin didn't stop, didn't hesitate. Every instinct, every fiber of her being screamed for her to maintain her composure. She should have. The air inside was humid, thick, and echoing faintly with the soft, rhythmic splash of water, an insidious sound, hinting at something intimate she was not meant to witness. A cold premonition, like a viper coiling in her gut, warned her, but her pride forbade retreat. She turned the corner into the expanse of bathing chambers and froze. Kai was in the tuba vast, deep marble basin that might have been carved from a mountain. He was sprawled, relaxed, steam curling up around his broad, powerful chest, wet hair slicked back from a face that, even in repose, radiated dangerous authority. Her breath caught, not from surprise at his nakedness, which was impressive in its raw animalistic beauty, but at the sheer gall of the summons. Fine, she thought, her internal voice a whip crack of contempt. Naked alpha in a tub. I've seen worse. No. What truly made her spine stiffen, what caused her fingers to curl into fists so tight her nails bit into her palms, wasn't him. It was her. The Omega, slender and pliant, straddled his lap, her back to Devin, her movements slow, deliberate, a soft, sensual grind that spoke of utter surrender. Her head was thrown back, lips parted in a soft moan that was barely audible over the splashing, but unmistakably there. One hand, pale and delicate, braced against Kai's wet shoulder, the other trailed down his chest, possessive, like she was marking territory. Devin's eyes narrowed. She knew that Omega. Same high chin, same passive-aggressive sneer, the one who'd called her Luna like it was a curse the day she arrived. Well, Devin thought coldly, now I know why she was such a bitch. She's been warming the alpha's bathwater. Devin didn't blink, didn't gasp, didn't flinch. Her remarkable control slammed into place, an iron mask over the scorching, molten fury that rose within her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a calculated humiliation. He hadn't just summoned her. He'd summoned her to witness this, to put her in her place, to show her exactly how little she mattered, how easily replaceable she was meant to be. A slow breath escaped her nose, almost imperceptible. Her lips curved into a smile that was all ice and no warmth. Ah, she said, her voice surprisingly light, almost conversational, yet edged with a dangerous porcelain fragility. I see how the roles work here. Just mount whoever the fuck you want, huh? A rather casual arrangement, wouldn't you agree? The word casual was a viper's hiss. The Omega, surprisingly, didn't stop, perhaps too lost in the moment. Kai, however, looked up sharply, his expression shifting from languid pleasure to something unreadable, his eyes narrowing on her. Devin ignored him for a beat, turning her head slowly to Nash, who had remained just inside the door, utterly impassive, a statue of loyalty. She met his gaze head on, her green eyes cool and unflinching. Nash, she said, voice a slow purr honey edged in poison. Would you be a dear and have someone draw me a bath? A big one. She tilted her head, her tone dipping lower, silkier. I think I'll find someone to scrub my back. Maybe offer a little sexual relief while they're at it. Her eyes snapped back to Kai, locking with his voice, laced with a biting smile. These past few days have been so tense. The Omega finally stilled, the implication of Devin's words, the raw contempt cutting through her haze. Kai's jaw tightened visibly. Devin held his gaze for another long, deliberate moment, letting the silence stretch, letting her words sink in, a poisoned dart finding its mark. Her green eyes, cold as glacial ice, were clear, unclouded by a single tear or a hint of vulnerability, just steel. Thank you, Alpha, she said, her voice crisp, each syllable clipped with precision, for setting the fucking tone. I'm expected to follow here. Her head tilted in a crisp, dismissive nod that managed to be both polite and utterly damning. And then she turned. She didn't run. She didn't stomp. She simply walked out, graceful, unbothered, unapologetic. Her back, ramrod straight, was a defiant banner. Her exit was a statement, not a retreat. It was her leaving him, not the other way around. Behind her, the resounding click of the heavy door was the only sound for a long, strained moment. For a moment, Kai just sat there wet, naked, and suddenly very aware of the Omega still clinging to him like a heat lamp. Her small hands on his chest felt repulsive, her soft skin irritating. The soft sound she made, grating, the entire scene, which moments ago had been pleasurable, was now tainted, observed, and judged. And that judgment, delivered with such icy disdain, had cut him deeper than any blade. He shoved the Omega off with a violent splash. Out. His voice was a guttural snarl, laced with a raw, unfamiliar disgust. She yelped, tumbling back into the tub's churning water, confused, her eyes wide with fear. I said, out! His voice snapped like a whip, echoing off the marble. The effortless control he usually possessed was frayed, replaced by a sudden, volatile anger that was directed, bewilderingly, at himself. The Omega scrambled out of the tub, gathering her things in a flustered blur, her body trembling, and disappeared like a shadow retreating at a brutal sunrise. Kai sat back, jaw tight, his brow furrowed in something foreign, something that had never touched him before. He watched the last ripples in the water settle, the steam still rising, but the pleasure was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow ache in his chest. It wasn't guilt, exactly. Guilt was too soft, too human. He'd never felt guilt for his actions, for asserting his alpha rights. No, this was something else. It was a shame. And that was new. A searing, uncomfortable heat that flushed his skin, made his stomach clench. He, Kai, alpha of alphas, had been seen, truly seen, and judged wanting. He'd never cared before what others thought. He'd never paused for the opinions of an omega, a beta, or even another alpha. Their judgment was irrelevant, their opinions inconsequential. But the way Devin had looked at him, like she could see straight through him, stripping away his power, his title, his dominance, and didn't like what she saw, that had hit something ancient in him, something primal that demanded respect, demanded recognition of his worth. She hadn't been intimidated. She hadn't been hurt. She had been disgusted. And that was a blow to his very core. He who commanded all had been made to feel small, undignified. Nash, he said, his voice low, sharp, the anger barely contained. I don't want any more Omega sent to my room. Nash nodded once, his expression finally betraying the barest hint of a smirk. Understood, Alpha. Back in her suite, Devin didn't cry. She didn't throw things or rage against the injustice. Such displays were for the weak, for those who hadn't mastered their storm. Instead, she entered her bath chamber, the opulent space, a stark contrast to the scene she just witnessed, and ran the water scalding hot. She stepped in, letting the heat prickle her skin. Then slowly, meticulously, she washed away the lingering scent of humid air and foreign bodies, the metaphorical grime of the encountered disrespect. When she emerged, her skin glowing, her mind clearer, she dressed in her softest sleep shirt, a simple garment of silk that felt like a second skin. She brushed her hair until it shone, then curled up on the deep, velvet couch, a worn copy of Wuthering Heights in her hands. The fire crackled beside her, a companionable presence. The moon, full and silver, cast ribbons of light across the stone floor, painting the room in shades of quiet strength. She read until the tensions in her muscles slowly unknotted, until the sharp edge of the insult dulled, until her thoughts quieted, coalescing into a single, cold resolve. She would not be broken. She would not be diminished. And somewhere across the compound, an alpha, for the first time in his powerful life, couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, haunted not by a vision of beauty or desire, but by the icy, unyielding gaze of a woman who had seen his shame. The summons came before dawn. A sharp, insistent rap at Devin's door, splintering the pre-dawn quiet. Tamsin's voice, a low rumble filtered through the thick wood, was neutral, practiced, but with an underlying tension Devin immediately detected. Training, mandatory. Alpha's orders. Devin didn't ask why. She didn't roll her eyes or drag her feet. The frigid air of the mountain morning seeped under her door, a biting reminder of the world outside. She moved with purpose, the only sound in the small room, the rustle of fabric. She dressed, not for comfort, but for combat. Tight black leggings, thick and durable, capable of withstanding tears and scrapes. A fitted tank top, dark and unrestrictive, layered beneath a thin, breathable long sleeve that hugged her muscles. Boots laced high and tight, their soles heavy with traction. Her hair, a pure white cascade, was efficiently braided down her back, a practical whip that wouldn't snag or obscure her vision. She hadn't seen Kai since the incident in the bath. She didn't plan to speak of it either. Her wolf had turned her back on him completely, not out of rage, but a profound disappointment, a cold, bitter silence that cut deeper than any scream. And, oddly enough, it made things clearer. The emotional static had cleared. She didn't have to worry about what her wolf wanted. She just had to be. The training yard was a raw, expansive patch of packed earth and gravel, encircled by rough-hewn timber walls. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp soil, cold morning dew, and the faint, familiar tang of wolf. It was full. Not just the usual enforcers and upper-tier warriors, but the entire pack, a sea of hulking, restless bodies, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others already bristling with competitive energy. They were gathered like the Alpha himself had bellowed his summons from the jagged peak of the mountain, which, knowing Kai, wasn't far from the truth. He stood at the center of the ring, a figure carved from granite, shirtless, despite the chill, his powerful arms crossed over his chest. His wolf aura, usually a palpable pressure, was coiled tighter than usual, radiating a dangerous stillness. He wasn't even pretending not to watch her as she approached, his silver eyes tracking her every move. Devin said nothing as she took her place in the lineup, falling into a ready stance beside a massive warrior with a busted nose and an air of too much ego. The murmurs died down to a low hum as Kai's gaze drifted down the line, a silent challenge in every sweep. "Today's not about sparring," he called out, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried across the yard. "It's about showing me what you've got. Every last one of you." His eyes landed on Devin for a beat longer than the others, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, Luna included. The hum in the yard escalated into a chorus of hushed murmurs. Everyone had heard about her. No one had truly seen her fight. Not yet. The training yard buzzed with energy boots scuffing, muscles stretching, murmurs passing between warriors too proud to admit they were curious. Because today, she was training with them. Devin stood at the end of the third row, her stance precise, fists clenched at her sides. Her white braid fell down her back, a stark slash against her black training gear. The morning sun kissed her skin, and she stood like stone small, but immovable. She didn't look at anyone, didn't smile, didn't need to. Kai stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Nash remained to his right, as always alert, silent, eyes scanning. They watched as drills began. Basic warm-ups, then pair rotations, moving in synchronized strikes. She kept up easily, then surpassed them. Her kicks were sharper, her stance more grounded, her speed coiled and calculating. The warriors beside her were starting to notice glances, smirks fading into something warier, the sharpness in her movements, the sheer power packed into her strikes. And someone else noticed too, Kai. He didn't say a word, but his gaze lingered, focused, intense. Then mid-spin, Devin pivoted, her heel slamming into the post again. As her foot hit the ground, her eyes, those sharp, impossible green eyes, snapped forward and met his. The moment cracked like a live wire. No glowing light, no gasps from the pack, just a gut-deep jolt that seared under the skin. Raw, silent, undeniable, her breath hitched. His brow tightened. Neither looked away. They stood apart, an alpha and a fighter. But in that sliver of time, something ancient stirred between them. Recognition, uninvited, unwanted, unshakable. She turned first, striking again, like nothing had happened, but everything had. And Kai said nothing, but Nash caught the way his jaw tightened. The shift in stance, the flicker of something unreadable in his alpha's eyes. Training continued, but nothing about that morning would be forgotten. Kai began to bark drills complex formations, aggressive holds, intricate counter strikes, and Devin executed each one with mechanical precision, her movements fluid and economical. She was a weapon, honed and quiet. When he barked corrections, sharp and demanding, she didn't challenge. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She just met his gaze, her own eyes cool, and said, "Yes, Alpha. Every single time." It threw him off. That cold professionalism, that perfectly measured obedience. It wasn't a submission. There was no weakness in it. It was distance, a moat around her spirit, wide and deep, a barrier he couldn't breach. He drove her harder, faster, trying to find a crack, a flicker of frustration, anything that would show her true self. But she remained a still, unwavering force. After an hour of relentless drills, Kai's patience snapped. He needed to see what she was truly made of. No controlled movements, no choreography. He needed heat. He needed to push her past the point of precise execution and into raw instinct. He needed her to fight. "Devin," he said, his voice like thunder, silencing the scattered murmurs of the pack. "Into the ring." She didn't hesitate. She stepped into the center of the training area, a designated open space, her eyes calm, her shoulders relaxed, no change in her expression. Kai looked to one of the larger warriors on the line, Rygar, a 6'2" slab of wolf muscle, notoriously cocky, with a reputation for putting new recruits in their place. "Rygar," Kai commanded, his voice tight. "You're up." Rygar grinned, a flash of white teeth, bouncing on his heels like he'd just been given a chew toy. The rest of the yard went quiet. Even Nash and York, usually unflappable, exchanged glances that bordered on concern. But Kai wanted to know what was under that stillness. What was she hiding? They circled, dust eddying around their boots. Rygar threw the first strike, a heavy, winding jab aimed at her head, meant to test her reaction time, to see if she flinched. She dodged cleanly, a fluid sidestep, the punch whistling past her ear. Second came a hook faster, meaner, meant to throw her off balance. She ducked under it, the swing brushing close enough to lift strands of her hair. Then she spun, a coiled spring snapping loose, and cracked him across the jaw with a clean, straight punch. The sound was sharp like a whip crack through silence. The crowd winced as Rygar stumbled back, blinking, his eyes unfocused as if he'd seen stars. A trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Before he could recover, before his bulk could regain its footing, she stepped forward, lightning fast, and landed another Haida-precise short jab dead center, right between the eyes. He grunted, a strangled sound, his head snapping back. Then she pivoted, her hips rotating, her weight shifting. The roundhouse kick came fast, precise, and brutal, impacting with a sickening thud against his temple. Crack. Rygar dropped like a stone, a lifeless heap of muscle and bone. He hit the packed earth with a dull thud, not a twitch. "If that's all," she said, turning on her heel, "I'll be in my quarters." She didn't wait for praise, didn't need permission. Just walked off like she'd won something bigger than a sparring match. She didn't so much as glance at the crumpled form of her opponent. She walked out of the ring, her gaze forward, her braid swaying like a banner behind her. She didn't look at Kai, didn't need to. She walked straight through the stun yard, a path parting before her, through the compound, and back to her quarters. She didn't slam the door. She closed it with a soft click. She didn't even sigh. She just peeled off her gloves, the raw scent of leather and faint copper clinging to them, washed her hands methodically, and picked her book back up like nothing had happened. The quiet hummed around her, unbroken. Somewhere across the grounds, the Alpha of Blackwind stared at the spot where she'd stood, shoulders tense, heart pacing slow and uncertain in his chest. A profound, unsettling silence had fallen over the pack, broken only by the distant, pained groans of Rygar's recovery. Kai didn't know how to reach her. And for the first time in his life, Kai didn't know how to win. Assigning Nash as Devin's guard had seemed logical at the time, necessary even. A practical, almost clinical decision made on the cold logic of security protocols and pack hierarchy. But by day 3, Kai was already questioning it. A faint, persistent prickle of unease had settled in his gut, growing with each passing hour. She didn't need protection. He'd seen enough of her movements, her self-assured posture, to know that. Hell, most days Nash might need it more, given the occasional skirmishes among the younger, too eager wolves on the training grounds. Still, there was a sense of order to uphold, a meticulously maintained facade of control. Aluna, especially one not yet fully claimed, not yet truly etched into the pack's very being, couldn't be roaming the grounds without eyes on her. At least, that's what Kai told himself, the well-worn argument a thin shield against the deeper, more unsettling truth. The truth sat heavier, a dull throb beneath his ribs. He just wanted someone near her, to see her, to genuinely understand her, to gauge the depth of the waters that flowed beneath her calm, unreadable surface. Because he was starting to suspect, with a growing certainty that both fascinated and unnerved him, what Devin showed the world was only a fraction of what lived inside her. A sliver of glacial strength, perhaps, but what else lay hidden beneath the ice? Nash found her precisely where he expected, on the vast, compacted earth of the training field, already mid-rep, a lone, focused silhouette against the bright afternoon sun. The air hummed with the faint metallic scent of ozone and the sharper tang of exertion. She wore a sleeveless, form-fitting top, the fabric clinging to the lean, powerful curves of her shoulders and arms, which were slick with sweat, gleaming like polished stone. A thick white braid, as pure as fresh snow, was coiled around one shoulder like a battle flag, damp strands escaping to plaster against her neck. Her strikes against the heavy training dummy were a brutal symphony of efficiency. Each punch landed with a resonant thud that vibrated through the ground, each kick a sharp whistle of displaced air. No wasted movement, no superfluous flair, just raw, distilled force. It was poetry in violence. He watched for a long while, unmoving, arms folded across his chest. The rhythmic thump-thump kick filled the silence, punctuated only by her steady, deep breaths. Devin didn't stop, didn't even glance his way. She just spoke between breaths, voice light but dry, the words cutting through the air with surprising clarity. "You're hovering." Nash blinked, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Observing." She finished her combo with a back kick that cracked through the dummy's thick hide, nearly wrenching its canvas jaw from its foundation. The sound was deeply satisfying. "Don't you have better things to do than watch me sweat?" Her tone was flat, devoid of real irritation, more a challenge. "I was assigned. To babysit?" she asked, a sliver of mischief in her deadpan delivery. "To guard." "Same thing," she retorted, already resetting her stance. Nash pushed off the weapons rack, the faint crunch of pebbles under his boots, the only sound as he stepped onto the worn mat. The scent of her exertion, sharp and clean, filled his nostrils. "Want to work off the attitude?" Devin's grin was sharp and brief, a flash of predatory amusement. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, glinted with anticipation. "Thought you'd never ask." They didn't talk much after that. Fist said enough. The first few exchanges were probes, careful dances of feint and parry. But what started as a test, a wary sizing up, quickly escalated into a war dance, a raw, primal expression of power. Devin moved like someone intimately acquainted with pain, someone who had faced it, absorbed it, and then learned to wield it like a weapon. Fast, calculated. Every movement precise, every counterstrike delivered with devastating precision. That Arctic wolf bite strength Nash had briefly glimpsed upon her arrival was now in every sinew, every bone-jarring blow. He felt the thud of her fist against his padded guard, the surprising impact radiating up his arm, making his teeth clench. He countered, a low grunt escaping him as she ducked beneath his swing, her elbow snapping out to catch him just above the ribcage. It wasn't a showy fight. It was tight, economical, a brutal conversation of bodies. The air grew thick with their shared pantomime of violence. The only sounds, the rhythmic swish of fabric, the pop of impact, the harsh exhalation of breath. Sweat plastered his hair to his scalp, stung his eyes, and ran in rivulets down his spine. The taste of iron, faint but distinct, coated his tongue. Nash was impressed by the fifth strike, the sheer unyielding force behind her slender frame. respectful by the 10th strike, marveling at her tactical awareness, her ability to anticipate his moves. By the 20th, a genuine, wide grin split his face, born of pure exhilaration and a profound, unexpected pleasure. She was good, terrifyingly, exhilaratingly good. By the end, both were breathing hard, chests heaving, bodies bruised with the echo of controlled impacts. His knuckles throbbed, and a faint ache bloomed in his jaw, but the satisfaction that settled over him was profound, wordless. "You train like one of us," he managed finally, his voice rough, sweat dripping from his brow and stinging his eyes. Devin just shrugged, the simple gesture somehow brimming with quiet confidence. "I didn't come here to fall behind." Nash didn't say more. He didn't need to. The understanding was clear, a new, unspoken language forged in the crucible of shared exertion and mutual respect. That evening, the scent of dusk settling over the packlands, Nash stepped into Kai's office. He brushed instinctively at the lingering dust on his sleeves, a faint aroma of sweat and earth still clinging to his clothes. The office was quiet, dimly lit by the single lamp on Kai's expansive desk, where a detailed pack map lay unfurled, its lines and symbols a constant reminder of the Alpha's burden. Kai looked up, his strong features softened by the warm glow. "How'd she do?" "She's strong." Nash's voice was flat, devoid of embellishment. "I gathered that," Kai replied, a hint of impatience in his tone. "No," Nash said, leveling his gaze, his eyes still holding the ghost of the afternoon's intensity. "She's our level strong." Kai leaned back in his leather chair, the faint creak of the springs breaking the silence. His eyes, usually so sharp and piercing, narrowed slightly, a thoughtful, almost surprised expression settling over them. He studied Nash, sensing the undercurrent of genuine shock in his most seasoned warrior. "So she held her own against you?" Kai asked, his voice low, almost a murmur. "She nearly took my jaw off," Nash admitted, a slight, almost imperceptible touch to his chin. "And she doesn't just hit hard, she's smart, controlled. She thinks 2 moves ahead." Kai let the silence sit for a beat, the only sound the faint, rhythmic drumming of his fingers against the polished armrest. He didn't dismiss Nash's assessment, didn't question it. He absorbed it, his gaze drifting from Nash to the map, then to the large window overlooking the grounds. "She doesn't need protecting," Nash added, the words a quiet declaration. "No, but maybe we do," Kai said, almost to himself, his voice a surprising whisper of introspection. That earned a blink from Nash, a slow, deliberate one. "What's that supposed to mean, Alpha?" Kai finally looked out the window, toward the training yard, where the last embers of twilight bled into the deep indigo of night, and the first sliver of moon was just beginning to rise, a pale ghost in the darkening sky. She carries all that fire, all that raw, untamed power, and still walks like a storm hasn't touched her. There's softness in her. Somewhere. Kai's voice was uncharacteristic, laced with a vulnerability that startled Nash. "Like winter sunlight. You know it's rare, so you notice it more. And it changes the room, changes us, just by being there." Nash blinked again. Once. Then slowly, a disbelieving grin stretched across his face, spreading from ear to ear. He couldn't help it. "Didn't realize you were a poet, Alpha." "Shut up!" Kai's voice was gruff, but a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. Nash chuckled, a low rumble of genuine mirth as he turned for the door. "I'll tell York you're getting sentimental. He owes me $20 on that bet." "Nash." "Yeah?" Nash paused, hand on the cool metal of the doorknob. "Keep an eye on her, but for Alpha's sake, don't get in her way." Nash nodded once, his grin still firmly in place as he left the office, the quiet click of the door echoing behind him. The air outside felt crisper, the moonlight brighter, and the prospect of a good night's rest, even with a few new bruises, suddenly seemed incredibly appealing. Behind him, Kai leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze still fixed on the moonlit training field. And for the first time since Devin had arrived, a force of nature wrapped in human skin, he wasn't trying to figure her out. He was trying to figure out himself. The subtle shift she had wrought in him, in his carefully constructed world, was undeniable. And in that quiet moment, under the rising moon, He found himself not afraid, but profoundly, cautiously intrigued. The knock at her door was polite but firm, cutting through the rhythmic thud of her self-training, the satisfying pull and release of wrapped fists. Tamsin's voice followed quickly, a whisper of formal authority that always set Devin's teeth on edge. The Alpha has asked for you. Devin set down her training bandages, the fine linen still warm from her skin, and rose without a word. Her muscles hummed, a pleasant ache she welcomed, after another hour spent sparring with shadows. It was a stark reminder of her agency, a quiet defiance to the rigid roles laid out for her. She hadn't been alone in a room with Kai since that night, since steam and skin and betrayal had collided in a marble tub. A faint shiver, not of fear but of potent memory, traced down her spine. The raw vulnerability, the unexpected intimacy, and then the sharp sting of his casual dismissal, it all still resonated. She wasn't nervous now, she was curious, and perhaps a touch predatory. The grand oak door to his office creaked open as she stepped in, her posture straight, eyes cool, assessing. The room was vast, dominated by dark wood and leather, a scent of old parchment and male power clinging to the air. He was already standing behind a massive, polished desk framed by tall, arched windows that overlooked the inner compound. No enforcers, no guards, no distractions, just Kai. And, for the first time, she truly saw him. He wasn't cloaked in the impenetrable armor of his rank or the stiff rituals of his position. He was simply a man facing her. "Devin," he said, his voice low, a deep rumble that lacked its usual command, carrying instead a surprising thread of unease. "Alpha," she replied smoothly, her tone a perfect counterpoint of respect and unyielding composure. He looked like he was ready to bite a bullet, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on hers with a mix of apprehension and grudging admiration. His large hands, usually so confident, seemed to flex at his sides. "I wanted to apologize," he started, the words escaping him with a visible effort, as if each syllable was physically painful. She raised a brow, arms crossing slowly over her chest, not quite challenging, but certainly waiting. "Because I walked in on your entertainment? Or because you just realized what I said might have been true?" Her voice was an even silk, devoid of accusation, yet sharp enough to cut. She watched him, assessing his reaction, a flicker of something close to amusement in her eyes. He didn't flinch, a testament to his ingrained stoicism. But he did exhale, a slow, controlled release of tension. That line, "Thank you, Alpha, for setting the tone I'm expected to follow here. It's been clawing at me." His gaze intensified, searching her face. It hit harder than any blow. "And you just realized what it meant as an alpha?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, as if genuinely curious about his delayed revelation. "That your actions set the standard for everyone, including your Luna?" Kai rubbed a hand down his jaw, a tell that revealed more than he probably intended. "I'm not used to someone talking back. Not like that." He didn't sound angry, just unaccustomed. "Well," she said dryly, a subtle arch to her lips, "then it must be exhausting when your entire pack, including your enforcers, doesn't hold you accountable either." The unspoken accusation hung in the air. You're surrounded by yes, men, Alpha. A twitch of something, maybe a ghost of a smile, quickly suppressed flickered around his eyes. "You're right. They don't. You're the first one who has." The admission was grudging, but honest. Devin didn't answer. The silence that followed was not awkward, but thick with understanding. It said enough. It confirmed her power, her place, her difference. He motioned toward the large table in the center of the room, where a detailed map of the compound was spread across the smooth black oak. He welcomed the shift in topic. She could tell. "I didn't call you here just to talk," he said, his tone shifting to something more grounded, more businesslike. "You need to know the layout, where to go, where not to be." His finger, thick and powerful, traced lines across the laminated surface. "These are the safe zones, training sectors." He pointed to a sprawling, heavily shaded area. "The lower compound is off limits, unless cleared holds sensitive operations. His finger moved again. That's the kitchen and dining hall. Over here is the armor secured access only. She blinked once, her cool gaze sharpening, focusing on that last point. You waited this long to show me the armory? Her voice was flat, laced with a familiar incredulity. I've been here for weeks, treated like a prize to be displayed or, worse, a fragile vase. Meanwhile, I'm supposed to rule by your side, unprepared for combat in a world that clearly demands it? Kai looked at her, his brow furrowing, a flash of defensiveness in his eyes. You're our Luna, not a soldier. Oh, I'm both, Alpha, she said, her spine straightening, eyes flint, hard. I've trained every day since I got here. Your enforcer knows it. A subtle nod towards Nash, though he wasn't present. And if this union is supposed to make me some sort of prize wolf, then you'd better believe I'll know what weapons I'm working with. Your pack's protection is my concern now, too, whether you want it to be or not. A pause. A long, considering silence stretched between them. He weighed her words, the truth of them undeniable. Fair enough, he said, the phrase sounding like a concession, a small crack in his rigid beliefs. Then he gestured. Come on, I'll take you down. The journey to the Blackwind Armory was made in companionable silence, a new dynamic between them. Kai led, his stride purposeful, but he occasionally glanced back, as if expecting her to falter. She didn't. Her steps were light, her focus sharp. The air grew cooler, heavier, as they descended deeper into the earth, the scent of metal and oiled leather growing stronger. The Blackwind Armory was a quiet cathedral of violence, a cavernous space carved from raw stone, illuminated by strategically placed, low-humming lights. Rows upon rows of black steel racks gleamed under the soft glow. Cabinets filled with neatly stacked boxes of silver-laced bullets lined one wall, while others held an array of throwing knives, their blades glinting wickedly. Racks of axes, short swords, and even a few antique crossbows there, wood polished to a gleam, their strings taut stood sentinel. The sheer scale and meticulous organization were impressive. This is... Devin walked the row slowly, her fingers trailing over the cold metal, a tangible thrill sparking in her eyes. Better stock than I imagined. Her voice held a note of genuine admiration, a rare sound he hadn't heard from her before. You expected it to be messy? He asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. I expected to be kept out of it, she corrected him, her hand resting briefly on the hilt of a finely balanced dagger. Like I've been kept out of everything else that matters. He said nothing, just watched her explore, a new kind of respect dawning in his gaze as he observed her natural affinity for the instruments of war. He saw not fear, but fascination, not revulsion, but recognition. Then she turned, her eyes bright, analytical, her fingers trailing over the leather grip of a longsword. What do you have in the way of dual-wielding weapons? Kai blinked, genuinely surprised. Dual-wielding? She nodded, patience in her posture. Daggers, short blades, paired weapons, something fast, balanced, for close quarters. We don't. He hesitated, genuinely puzzled. That's not something we've trained for. Not extensively. It's rare. Less control, harder to master, requires exceptional coordination. He gestured around the armory. Most of our warriors prefer the strength of a single axe or sword, or the range of a firearm. Her lips curled in a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a private smile, one that spoke of secrets and capabilities he couldn't yet fathom. Wait here. Devin left the armory without another word, her boots echoing down the stone halls, the sound fading into the cavernous silence. Kai stood alone for several minutes, still frowning, turning over her words, her request, dual wielding. It was a specialized skill, one he hadn't truly considered for his pack, let alone for his Luna. He wondered what she was planning, what she was truly capable of. When she returned, only a few minutes later, she carried something wrapped in a worn, dark linen wrap, slung in a leather satchel dyed midnight black. The strap was old, supple with age, the stitching hand-mended in places, a testament to his long life and frequent use. It felt ancient, imbued with history. She didn't speak, simply stepped close and placed the satchel in front of him with reverence, allowing him to see its contents but not touch them. "What's this?" he asked, a flicker of curiosity in his usually stoic gaze. Devin didn't answer. Her expression was solemn, her eyes holding a deep, distant memory. She just unwrapped it with deliberate slowness, revealing the treasure within. Twin, long-edged daggers lay nestled in the folds, their handles carved from darkened ashwood, burnished smooth with age and countless hours of use. The blades shimmered faintly cold, sharp, and deadly. They weren't just metal, they were etched with intricate, swirling old markings that seemed to writhe in the dim light, and their edges were kissed with a silvery sheen that wasn't merely decorative. This wasn't a showpiece. This was a weapon, a pair of weapons, balanced, deadly. Kai reached out, his powerful fingers brushing the cool hilt of one. He could feel it immediately more than just metal and wood. He felt legacy. These weren't blades you bought from a smith. These were blades you earned, passed down through generations. Each mark a testament to battles fought, to lives defended. "These were my grandfather's," Devin said softly, her voice carrying a fragile weight of memory. "Passed to me when I was still small. He taught me how to use them before I could drive. Said the Arctic wolf's bite is sharpest when it comes in pairs, that two fangs sink deeper than one." Kai picked one up, the weight surprisingly light, perfectly balanced. It felt like an extension of his hand, even though he was unfamiliar with such a weapon. He tested its weight in his palm, brows furrowed with focus. Then, almost without thinking, he gave it a smooth, spin-controlled, deliberate, the blade slicing the air with a low, whispering hiss. The sound was a song of precision and purpose. "There," he started, his voice unexpectedly quiet, almost reverent. "Beautiful." He repeated the word, not for their aesthetic, but for their inherent power, their history. "They're mine," she said firmly, her tone regaining its edge of command. "But I'll train your warriors with them, if they're willing to learn, if they're willing to move beyond what they think they know." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and the armor of his alpha rank seemed to fall away completely. He didn't look like a mate, weighing a potential partner. He looked like a man standing before a storm that didn't need thunder to be feared, only the silent, inexorable force of its coming. An ancient energy pulsed from her, from the blades, from the raw power in her unassuming frame. "I'm glad you're not soft," he said finally, his voice deep, gravelly. "A weak woman wouldn't survive the Dominion, not for a minute." He thought of the fragile, pampered Lunas he'd heard of, the ones who shattered under pressure. Devin was not one of them. She was tempered steel. Then his voice dropped, almost more breath than words, carrying a profound shift in understanding. "But damn, I think I was expecting someone who would bend eventually. Someone I could mold into what I needed. And you? You don't bend. You reshape the room." He saw it now, a clear, startling vision. She wasn't just joining his pack. She was redefining it. Kai didn't notice Nash standing quietly in the doorway, a report clutched and forgotten in his hand. Nash, who had been on his way to deliver an update, had frozen, listening. Didn't see the slow, wide grin that spread across the enforcer's face, a look of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. But Nash slipped away without a word, the report still clutched in his hand, leaving the Alpha and the Luna alone in the quiet hum of the armory. Grinning the whole way back to his post, a silent testament to the remarkable, terrifying power of the Arctic Luna. The sun had barely climbed past the treetops when the horn blew. Its deep, resonant bellow wasn't a casual morning call. It was a command, a warning, an urgent summons that vibrated in the very bones of every wolf within the Blackwind borders. It wasn't often the entire Blackwind compound was summoned at once. Alpha Kai reserved such a display for moments of true gravity, but when his signal echoed through the ancient forest, every warrior, scout, omega, and soldier in training ceased their morning routines. With a collective, unspoken understanding, they made their way to the central training yard with a purposeful urgency in their step. This wasn't casual. This wasn't a drill. The ring filled quickly, a sea of dark fur and watchful eyes. Murmurs swelled and rippled through the assembled pack like wind through a field of wheatsome curious, their gazes darting, some uncertain, a knot of unease tightening in their chests. Many, however, were there for one reason, a silent, simmering anticipation that had spread like wildfire through the compound over the past weeks. Her, their Luna. Word always spreads faster than official decree in a pack. Whispers of her raw power, stories of her sparring prowess, of her silencing Rygarth most volatile enforcer with a clean, brutal roundhouse to the jaw. Tales circulated of how Nash and Yorkstone carved pillars of Alpha Command, unflappable and uncompromising, had started watching her with something akin to respect, their usual stoic expressions subtly shifting whenever she moved. And now, the entire pack would see for themselves. Kai stood at the head of the yard, imposing and still, a figure of absolute authority. He was flanked, as always, by Nash on his right, York on his left. Both unmoving, unyielding, warriors in every sense, their presence a silent reinforcement of their alpha's strength. The weight of the gathered pack's anticipation pressed down, thick and humid, yet Kai remained unyielding, his gaze sweeping over his domain. And then, something subtle shifted. Nash, whose posture was usually as rigid as an oak, took a deliberate step to the side. It was a precise, almost imperceptible movement, creating an expanse of empty ground at Kai's immediate right. Not a mistake, not an oversight, a signal, a clear, undeniable invitation. Moments later, Devin appeared at the edge of the yard, stepping through the ring of gathered bodies as effortlessly as a blade through silk. Every head turned. Conversation died. A profound, almost reverent hush fell. Her snow-white braid, stark against the dark fabric of her clothing, swung low down her back, a striking visual against the muted greens and browns of the forest beyond. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of controlled neutrality. She wore black sleek, functional, and built for movement. No frills, no softness. Just clean lines that spoke of readiness, not fashion, prepared for whatever came. As she moved closer, her stride unhurried, absorbing the countless gazes fixed upon her, the silence around her deepened, becoming a heavy, expectant curtain. Kai's gaze locked on hers across the distance, a thread of connection drawing them together. His expression was controlled, calm, betraying nothing to the watchful eyes of his pack. But beneath that placid surface, something ignited a potent current he hadn't felt in years. Not like this, not this sharp, not this real. It was anticipation, yes, but also a recognition, a burgeoning sense of destiny. He spoke then, his voice cutting through the silence, loud and clear, carrying the undeniable weight of leadership in every syllable. For those of you that don't know yet, this is Devin, he announced, the words resonating with a power that left no room for doubt or challenge. She is Luna of the Blackwind Dominion. A ripple of reaction swept the yard. It wasn't uniform. Some faces registered outright surprise, a few outright shock. Others, those who had seen her in action, merely nodded, unsurprised, a murmur of grudging acknowledgement passing through them. One or two faces hardened, their eyes narrowed in skepticism or resentment toward her warriors, perhaps, who clung to tradition, or young pups who thought they knew better. But no one dared challenge the claim. Not out loud, not with Kai standing there. She will be treated as leadership, Kai continued, his voice gaining a sharper edge, a warning embedded within his words. And that means the same respect I expect from every one of you. No more, no less. She doesn't stand behind me. She stands with me. His gaze swept over the pack, challenging any who might think otherwise. Then, he moved. For the first time since she had arrived at the Blackwind compound, the first time in front of his entire pack, Kai reached out and took Devin's hand. It was a simple motion, unhurried, deliberate, intentional. But it shook them both to their core. The second their skin met, a primal jolt, an incandescent current, surged between them, searingly hot and intimately familiar. It wasn't just a spark. It was a conflagration, igniting in their veins, echoing deep in their ancient bones. A silent thrum, a resonant hum, permeated the very air around them, though only they could feel its true magnitude. It was the whisper of a bond waking, yes, but more rate was the roar of destiny recognizing itself, of two halves slotting into place with inevitability. The long dormant mate bond stirred buried beneath years of discipline and the weight of command, now rising fast and fierce beneath their skin. It had found its counterpoint, and it blazed to life with a fierce, untamed purity. Devin's breath hitched, a faint gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes, usually so guarded, flicked to his, wide with shock. Then, with a dawning comprehension that mirrored his own, her composure, usually a fortress, wavered just for a breath. He didn't say a word. Neither did she, but neither pulled away. The connection, now undeniable, held them fast. He guided her forward, his thumb stroking the back of her hand with an unconscious possessiveness, placing her beside him in the space Nash had cleared. And just like that, she stood at the front, shoulder to shoulder with the alpha. No protest, no question. From the pack, there was only a collective sigh, an acceptance that settled over the yard like a warm blanket. For many, seeing the bond ignite, seeing their alpha physically claim his Luna, solidified the truth. It was right. It was ancient. It was destiny. Now, Kai said, his voice turning sharper, harder, the previous warmth fading as he shifted back to the grave concerns of his dominion. He released her hand, though the lingering heat of the bond pulsed between them, a silent promise. On to why I've called you all here. The air tightened anew, a palpable shift from awe to anticipation of conflict. We've received word that a rival packed the Hollow Fangcast crossed our northern border. Not with a raid, not with a skirmish. No. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle, allowing the grim reality to sink into his pack. They've erected structures, fortified them, on our territory. A low growl ripped through the warriors like distant thunder waiting for a lightning strike. The sound was guttural, primal, a collective expression of territorial rage. Fists clenched, teeth bared, though subtly. This isn't posturing. This is encroachment. And tomorrow, we will respond. His voice was a low growl now, a dangerous rumble that promised swift and brutal vengeance. He looked out over his pack, gaze hard and unwavering, seeing the fire ignite in their eyes. Every elite unit, every soldier above the third rank, we leave at dawn to assess the threat. And by assess, York added under his breath, his lips barely moving, but his voice carrying a dark humor that only a few close by would hear, we mean wreck their shit. Nash, ever the stoic, didn't correct him. A faint, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth was Nash's equivalent of a grin. Kai let the tension hang for a single, pregnant breath. Then he turned slightly just enough for only Devin to hear, though with the heightened senses of the pack, many surely caught the low murmur. You'll remain here, he said, voice firm, authoritative, but edged with something quieter beneath. Not a command. Protection. She didn't argue. She was happy to stay behind. Instead, she met his gaze, steady and unreadable. Wasn't planning on asking permission. His lips twitched not, quite a smile, more a flicker of understanding, maybe even respect. But he said nothing else. They both knew it was settled. He turned back to the gathered pack, her presence now an undeniable force beside him, a visual declaration of her newly claimed status. The lingering warmth of their joined hands, the echo of the mate bond, was a private undercurrent in the public display. And somewhere deep inside him, a profound realization took root like a spark, finding dry kindling, blossoming into a quiet, certain flame. He wasn't leading towards something anymore. He was standing beside it. It was a new strength, a shared burden, a partnership he hadn't known he needed, but now recognized as essential. By the time the Blackwind compound began to stir with the first faint whispers of the next morning, Devin was already awake. She stood at her window, arms crossed, watching the bruised, pre-dawn moon bleed into the vibrant hues of sunrise across the distant ridge. Below, the training yard was a tableau of orchestrated chaos. Warriors moved like a dark tide loading weapons, securing packs, checking armor with practiced ease, silent focus, controlled energy. Each movement spoke of imminent departure, of a pack preparing for war. She wasn't among them. Kai's command still rang in her ears from the night before. "You'll remain here." And her own quiet, instinctive reply, "I wasn't planning on asking permission." She hadn't fought it. Not truly. Not this time. Not because she entirely agreed with being left behind when a pack went to war. Her instincts screamed to be on the front lines, in the thick of the fight. But this time, a deeper part of her, a more strategic mind, recognized the wisdom. Someone needed to keep an eye on what was left behind. Someone needed to oversee the defenses, manage the healers, and maintain order among those remaining. Someone needed to be the calm center while the alpha was away. And who better than the Luna, freshly installed and now, undeniably, made it. Her presence solidified the pack's morale, a visible anchor in their alpha's absence. She wasn't just the alpha's mate now. She was the Luna. Her role was changing, shifting from warrior to leader, from blade to shield. And even if her wolf still snarled at the thought of being excluded from battle, her mind understood the necessity. It was a different kind of war she would be fighting here. A battle of presence, of authority, of maintaining the very heart of the Blackwind Dominion, and she was ready for it. The day continued quietly, the kind of quiet that coats everything in unease. Devin had sensed it early how the wind carried no bird song, how the shadows between the trees seemed to breathe. She couldn't explain it. Not in words, but her wolf was alert, and so was she. The main compound moved with the light hum of routine. Pups playing by the gardens, a few warriors were running drills, Omegas were chatting near the laundry lines. She paced the courtyard with her usual intention present, silent, watching. She passed Marrow and Kel at the north wall tower. "Circuits look clean," Kel reported. Devin gave a nod but didn't slow. Her gut twisted. It started with the scent, not windborne. Close, too close. She turned on instinct, her daggers already in hand. Then the screaming started. The southern gate exploded inward with unnatural force. Wood, iron, and smoke rained through the compound. Shadows flooded in behind it fast. Lean figures, many in wolf form, teeth gleaming, eyes burning, hollow fang, and someone had let them in. Devin didn't wait. She threw her head back and howled long, sharp and commanding. Not a call for help, a command to shelter. "All non-combatants to the bunkers!" Devin's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, clear and unshakable. "Move!" She turned to a nearby soldier, eyes blazing. "Get them underground, now. And if you see anyone else in a Hollow Fang Crestkill on sight." She was already moving, dagger in one hand, snatching a panicked Omega by the collar with the other. "You, to the kitchens. Get the pup squads. Move." The girl nodded and ran. Merrill sprinted to her side, blood already smeared on his cheek. "How'd they breach?" "They didn't breach," she growled, eyes glowing. Someone opened the door. Kale came crashing down the eastern tower stairs, panting, eyes wide. "They're in the courtyard 20, maybe more, not counting the wolves in the trees. Get to the comms. Call the Alpha. Now." He hesitated. "Call him." At the northern border, Kai stood on a ridge, arms crossed, staring at nothing. No buildings, no threat, just trees, mist. A false report. York narrowed his eyes. "This makes no sense. They lured us out," Nash muttered, already pulling out his comm unit. That's when Kel's call came through static and chaos in the background. "Alpha! They're in the compound! Hollow Fang! We've got injuries!" "Luna's holding them back, but..." "What?" Kai's voice snapped like thunder. "Someone let them in." The signal cut. Kai didn't hesitate. "Turn around," he growled. Now. Back at the compound, the courtyard was a war zone. Blood stained the stone paths. Smoke billowed from the kitchen windows. One of the training huts had already been torched, flames licking at the sky as the scent of burning wood and singed fur choked the air. Screams, sharp and terrified, mingled with the guttural snarls of the invaders. Devin fought like fury incarnate. Her white braid snapped behind her like a banner. Both daggers flashed with silver-tipped vengeance, carving arcs through air and bone alike. She struck with precision jugulars, ribs, nerve clusters. One hollow fang tried to flank her from the left, and she pivoted mid-swing, plunging a blade into his neck so deep it came out clean through the back. She yanked it free without blinking, spattering hot blood across her face. 3 more circled her young, cocky, thinking her size meant vulnerability. She welcomed the miscalculation. 2 charged. She ducked beneath the first, kicked his knee sideways with a crunch that echoed even over the din, and slammed both daggers upward into the second's ribcage before spinning to slice the first's throat as he screamed, choking on his blood. The third bolted. "Fucking coward," she spat. She didn't stop, didn't rest. The strategic points of the compound were her focus. The bunkers, the sensitive zones, the armorial paths to safety or resources for the non-combatants she'd ordered to shelter. She was a whirlwind of controlled violence, her movements economical, every strike lethal. She saw a mother attempting to drag her child through the chaos, frozen in terror. Devin didn't hesitate. She shifted subtly, drawing a snarling brute away from them, forcing him to engage her instead. He lunged, and she met him head on, her blade finding his heart before he could touch the ground. "Run, bunkers!" she roared, her voice shredded but still commanding. The mother, shocked into action, fled with her child. Devin kept moving. Inside the compound halls, she pushed through debris and bodies, checking every room for survivors. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic tang of fresh blood. She found Tamsin in the hall outside the Luna suite, bloodied but alive, protecting 3 trembling pups with a butcher's knife in hand. "Get them to the safe chamber," Devin barked, her eyes sweeping the shadow corners. "Now." Tamsin hesitated, wide-eyed. "But what about you?" Devin didn't flinch. "I'll hold the stairs." Then she drew her blades, planted her feet, and snarled toward the dark. "Come on then, you bastard sons of bitches." She held the stairs until her arms screamed, until blood dripped from her knuckles, until her blades felt like extensions of her bones. Enemy after enemy came. Some in fur, bristling with feral rage. Some in flesh, their human forms twisted by malice. All of them fell, but she was tired, slowing. She knew it. She refused to show it. The deep cut across her ribs from an earlier engagement throbbed with every breath, and a dull ache started to bloom in her left arm where a claw had raked across her bicep. Just as another wave surged toward her 5, maybe 6 Hollowfang wolves in full shift, she squared her stance, teeth bared. Then a howl shattered the sky. Not hers, not his, theirs. Hollowfang wolves, calling more to the slaughter, a chilling reply answered from beyond the compound walls. The sound rolled over the compound like a death knell, a promise of overwhelming numbers. Devin's grip tightened around her daggers, her arms shaking now, muscles burning from strain. She didn't have much energy left. Across the courtyard, another wave of Hollowfang wolves surged forward, 5 of them, snarling, foam at their jaws, blood already staining their coats. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter. She moved, straight into them, a blur of white braid and silver steel rage. Her daggers flashed, met flesh, and cut deep. She dropped the first one with a brutal strike to the temple, spun to avoid a lunge, buried her elbow in the second's throat, and slashed upward with both blades. The third caught her across the ribs. She staggered, gasped, then roared, and kept going. This time, the claw found purchase, ripping through her side, a burning fire blooming beneath her skin. She stumbled, but used the momentum, twisting sharply and burying her dagger into the wolf's flank. It yelped, a high-pitched whine, and stumbled back. The fourth, a massive brute with scarred fur, lunged for her throat. She met it with a desperate 2-handed parry of her daggers, the blades deflecting its jaws, but the sheer force slammed her back against a burning wall. The heat seared through her clothes, making her gasp, but she held on, driving one dagger through the wolf's jaw. It thrashed, its breath hot and fetid on her face, but she didn't release, twisting the blade, until its struggles ceased and it dropped, lifeless. She pushed off the scorching wall, blood streaming from her side, her face grimy with smoke and sweat, her lungs burned with every ragged breath. Her vision blurred at the edges, but her eyes, still glowing with fierce determination, scanned the chaos. The courtyard was a charnel house. More Hollowfang were pouring in through the breached gate, their numbers swelling, pushing past the bodies of their fallen. Meryl was down, unmoving, near Kel, who was valiantly fighting off 2 wolves at once but was overwhelmed. Other warriors, too few, were scattered, making their desperate stands. The bunkers were sealed, she hoped, but the attackers were now focusing their efforts on flushing out any remaining resistance. Devin was alone. The 5 from the last wave were quickly replaced by 10, then 15, then what felt like an endless tide. They surrounded her, forming a tightening circle, their snarls a chorus of impending death. Her daggers felt impossibly heavy. Her body screamed for rest, for surrender. But then she pictured the pups, the fearful omegas hidden in the cramped dark of the bunkers, safe only because of the desperate, bloody ground she had gained. She pictured Kai, trusting her, leading her. No, she would not break. She took a wobbly stance, her weight shifting from one numb leg to the other, her gaze unwavering as the first of the new wave lunged, a massive gray wolf, jaws wide. Devin lifted her daggers, a low, feral growl rumbling in her chest, her bloodied white braids swinging as she prepared to meet them. If they were going to breach her pack, they were going to bleed for it. Every last one of them. Even if she stood alone against the very fires of hell, they rode like thunder, a storm of hooves and paws pounding over stone and earth as Kai led his elite guard back toward the Dominion. The air around him felt electrified, burning with a cold, precise fury. His wolf pace beneath his skin fur bristled, fangs bared, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Every instinct screamed, a primal warning of violation. He'd been tricked, lured away from his heart, from his home, from her, and they'd struck her. Kai was the first through the tree line, his eyes scanning the horizon for the first signs of his compound. Nash and York flanked his sides, a fleet of Blackwind warriors hard on their heels, each man a shadow of the Alpha's rage. Smoke was rising, thick, black plumes curling into the sky like a curse, staining the sunset with an ominous pall. Fires flickered, hungry orange tongues devouring structures. They expected devastation, a ruin they would have to painstakingly rebuild. Yet, even through the smoke and scattered flames, the main structures of the compound still stood battered, yes, but defiant. A miracle. What they found inside the breached walls was a war zone. The courtyard was littered not with just a few of their fallen, but with a gruesome mosaic of hollow fang corpses. The air thrummed with the fading echoes of battle, the scent of blood and ozone. And then, standing alone amidst the carnage, they saw her, Devin. She stood in the center of it all, a lone sentinel. Blood streaked her temple, a stark crimson against her pale skin. Her left arm hung at a bad angle, clearly dislocated or broken, and one leg was trembling from strain, threatening to give out beneath her. Her clothes were singed, torn, and clinging to her battered frame. Around her, the fallen enemies stretched out, testament to a savagery that could only belong to one person. She was breathing hard, her body shaking with exhaustion, but her eyes, though weary, were steady, unbroken. And then, before any of them could speak, move, or even breathe, she transformed. It was not a shift executed by a soldier, but a revelation, something divine. A blinding flash of pure, ethereal white light erupted from her, momentarily obscuring her form. A deep, resonant crack echoed through the courtyard as her bones shifted, elongated, and realigned, somehow sounding like creation rather than destruction. Her skin shimmered, giving way to fur snow pure, impossibly thick, and majestic. She grew not just in size, but in presence, her wolf towering, massive, easily rivaling any male in the pack. Her limbs were powerful, lean, muscle-coiled beneath a flawless coat that seemed to absorb and reflect the fading light. Her eyes still, the vibrant crystal green of her human form glowed like twin lanterns in the dusk, primal and ancient. An Arctic wolf, rare, mythic. A predator born of ancient bloodlines, a whisper of old magic made manifest. Even the hardened Nash muttered, a note of reverence in his voice. Holy shit, she's definitely Arctic. York, usually stoic, nodded once, his gaze fixed on her. That's no Luna. That's pure snow on paws. Devin didn't hesitate. No sooner had the transformation completed than she launched herself, a blur of white fury, into the final wave of hollow fang wolves, 3 stragglers still fighting near the inner barracks, their snarling desperation a stark contrast to her poised power. She moved with terrifying, exquisite grace, a silent hunter. Her jaws clamped down on the first wolf's neck with bone-snapping force, a sickening crunch that echoed in the sudden silence. The second tried to run. A flash of cowardice in its Aeshi tackled him mid-sprint, crushing his skull against the rough stone wall of the barracks with a single, brutal shove. The last turned, a desperate snarl tearing from its throat, and lunged, jaws open, claws extended, aiming for her throat. She met him mid-air. Her powerful body slammed into his, knocking the breath from him, and her fangs sank deep into his shoulder. His scream was cut short, choked into a gurgle as she twisted her head, tearing, ripping. When she stood, moments later, the last enemy lay broken at her feet. It was over. The compound was silent again except for the soft crackle of dying flames, the distant whimpers of wounded Blackwind warriors, and her ragged, exhausted breaths. The massive Arctic wolf turned slowly, her glowing eyes scanning the warriors now pouring into the compound, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. Her gaze found Kai's first, a silent question passing between them, and then she wobbled, a moment of falter. A tremor ran through her powerful frame, and the mythic beast, the savior, began to collapse. Kai was there before her body hit the ground, a primal roar tearing from his throat. He caught her halfway through the shift, her fur vanishing in a shimmering wave, giving way to bloodied, bruised skin. He could smell singed fur, the metallic tang of blood, but it was Devin. His Devin. Devin! His voice cracked, for the first time not as an alpha, but as a man terrified to his core, witnessing the fragility of something he treasured. Her eyelids fluttered open, her crystal green eyes hazy, her breaths came in sharp, broken gasps, each one a struggle. "Alpha, did I?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, fragile as spun glass. "Did I save them?" The pups, the women, the fierce warrior who just moments ago had been a myth made flesh, was now a small, broken thing in his arms, her vulnerability stark and heart-wrenching. Kai lowered himself to the blood-stained ground, cradling her trembling, blood-smeared body against his chest. Her skin was bare, fragile in its exposure, and without a moment's hesitation, he stripped off his heavy, fur-lined alpha coat, wrapping it around her like a protective cocoon, shielding her from the cold and prying eyes. "You did more than save them, Luna," he murmured, his voice thick and rough with emotion, raw with relief and lingering fear. "You carried them through the fire. You fought with everything you had. You are a force." She let out a shaky breath, a single tear slipping from the corner of her eye, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "It was a lot, Alpha. It was so much. I tried to save them all." The weight of the battle, of the lives she had carried on her shoulders, pressed down on her. Kai leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers, his own eyes burning with unshed emotion. "Luna, you're strong, fierce. You gave everything, Devin. Everything. Now, let me take it from here. You rest. I've got you." For the first time since he'd known her, he saw past her defiance, her fiery spirit, her sharp bite. He saw her heart, fragile and wild and still beating. Even through all of this, he saw his soulmate. "Nash!" he roared, his voice regaining some of its alpha command, slicing through the stunned silence toward the doorway where his enforcer stood. Nash appeared like a shadow, his face grim. "Alpha, get a healer now, the best we have, and tell them to prepare my quarters." Nash vanished, moving with a speed that spoke volumes of the urgency in Kai's command. Kai carefully scooped Devin into his arms. She was light, too light, and he held her as if she were made of spun glass. He carried her through the blood-streaked courtyard, past the awed warriors, past the dying embers of the fires, his gaze fixed on her pale, exhausted face. He carried her through silent halls into the privacy of his chambers, the strongest alpha reduced to nothing but a man consumed by the need to protect. He gently laid her down on the edge of his massive bed, her head sinking into the plush pillows. She barely stirred, her fingers twitching weakly against the lining of his coat wrapped around her. "I'm okay, Alpha," she murmured, her eyes half-lidded, a whisper of defiance even in her pain. "I'm okay." "No," he whispered, his thumb brushing a stray strand of hair from her brow, his voice a raw caress. "You're not, but you will be." A moment of silence passed between them, heavy with everything neither could say, with the unspoken bond that had been forged in fire and blood. Then she opened her eyes again, blinking slowly, a flicker of awareness returning. "Someone let them in," she said, her voice a low, raspy accusation. Kai's jaw clenched, the soft, tender edge in his expression iced over, replaced by a dangerous, cold fury. "York!" he barked, not bothering to look away from Devin. The other enforcer stood at the door, silent and vigilant, awaiting his alpha's command. Kai's voice dropped to something cold, something deadly, something that promised retribution would be swift and brutal. "Bring me the traitor." Morning came slowly and quietly, painting the world in shades of gentle gold. Golden light filtered through the ornate wooden slats of the windows in Kai's quarters, casting long, warm bands across the polished stone floor and over the soft, rhythmic rise and fall of Devin's chest beneath the thick, silken sheets. The air, heavy with the lingering scent of cedar, smoke, and something distinctly him, was still and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. She stirred first, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The profound ache that had permeated every single one of her limbs, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, had faded to nothing more than a ghost of a memory. The sharp, searing pain in her ribs, where the rogue had struck, was gone entirely. Even the angry purpling bruises that had blossomed across her side like spilled ink were already fading, their edges softening, their vibrant hues muted to a dull, almost healed, ochre. Wounds healed fast when you were built like her, a truth she sometimes forgot, only to be reminded by moments like these. But exhaustion? That stubborn phantom lingered a little longer, clinging to the edges of her awareness. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting, taking in the unfamiliar vaulted ceiling high above. This was Kai's private sanctuary, a space she rarely entered, and she found a strange comfort in its quiet solidity. Her senses, now fully awake, registered the dominant notes of cedar and smoke, interwoven with something deeper, more primal, the rich, earthy scent of Kai himself. She turned her head slowly on the plush pillow, her gaze settling on him. He was slumped deeply in the large leather armchair beside her bed, still fully dressed in his customary black shirt and trousers, boots still on, head resting back against the dark cushion. He was fast asleep, utterly still, yet there was a deep-seated tension in every inch of him, visible even in repose, as if even in sleep he couldn't stop bracing for the next threat, the next challenge. He must have fallen asleep watching over her. A quiet warmth spread through her chest. Devin exhaled, slowly, a soft, almost inaudible sound, and deliberately pulled the heavy sheet higher, up across her bare chest, a subtle, almost unconscious reclaiming of privacy. Then, with a gentle stretch of her arm, she reached out and tapped him on the hand just once. "Alpha?" she said quietly, her voice still a little husky from sleep and lingering strain. "Morning!" He stirred instantly, a low grunt rumbling in his chest. His head rolled toward her, eyes half-lidded, unfocused for a moment before snapping into sharp awareness. He blinked, cleared his throat. "To you," he muttered, his voice rough with sleep, raising a hand to rub at his eyes. "It's Kai, not Alpha." Devin's lips curved into a soft, almost imperceptible smirk. "Still sounds like a title to me, no matter how you dress it up." He leaned forward, stretching his broad back with a low, satisfying groan that vibrated in the quiet room. "How do you feel?" "Like I went a few rounds with death and made him cry," she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. That pulled a short, genuine laugh from him, a deep, resonant sound that filled the peaceful space. He pushed himself out of the chair, his movements fluid and powerful, and crossed to the adjoining washroom. The immediate sound of water hitting stone followed a steady, cleansing flow. He was gone only a few minutes before emerging again, looking refreshed. His damp, dark hair was combed back from his forehead, and he was now dressed in a clean black shirt and a charcoal vest. The sleeves rolled to his muscled elbows, revealing intricate tattoos peeking from beneath. "Go shower," he said gently, his voice softer now, devoid of sleep's roughness. "I'll call someone to bring clothes that fit." Devin raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in her eyes. "What? Nothing in your closet in my size? I'm sure I could roll up a sleeve or two." He gave her a crooked, disarming smile. "You're free to wear mine if you like the smell of danger and pine. And perhaps a hint of wolf." She snorted softly, a breathy laugh, and pushed off the sheets, wrapping one around her before heading to the washroom, the soft swish of silk following her. Meanwhile, across the blood-soaked, yet now safe compound, Nash and York had found the traitor before dawn, his cowardly hiding place discovered in the pre-dawn quiet. They dragged him from a forgotten storage room beneath the eastern wing, tucked away amongst old supplies. He still had blood on his shirt, presumably from a minor wound of his own, and a pathetic, defiant smirk still clung to his lips, a smirk quickly wiped away when York, his jaw clenched, slammed him against the cold stone wall hard enough to shake plaster loose from the ancient mortar. The coward broke in less than 10 minutes. The details tumbled out in a torrent of pathetic excuses and self-preservation. He'd been bribed, promised a position of power, a piece of territory in the Dominion once it fell, foolish enough to believe Fang would honor a deal made with a turncoat. Nash, his eyes burning with a cold, contained fury, looked like he wanted to snap the man's scrawny neck then and there, a quick, brutal end. But they held back. There were bigger things to report, more important truths to acknowledge. By the time they returned to Kai's wing, the compound was slowly stirring, a cautious, relieved hum replacing the night's terror. Every pup, every Omega, every elder, every soldier who'd stayed behind to fight or hide, had told the same story in hushed, reverent whispers. How she had commanded the defense eyes alight with a fierce, unwavering determination. How she had fought for every single soul in the Dominion like she was born to it, a natural, undeniable leader. How she had never backed down, not even when facing impossible odds. And Kai stood in stark, unmoving silence as Nash relayed each detail, his face impassive but his eyes burning with a deep, knowing light. He listened to the accounts of her strategic mind, her raw power, her sheer courage. He heard the echoes of Luna already being whispered on the wind, not as a title he'd forced, but one she had undeniably earned. His Luna, his equal, his fire. The words resonated deep within him, settling into the core of his being, fulfilling an ancient promise. She emerged from the washroom a few minutes later, clean, refreshed, and dressed in the fresh clothes that had been delivered, simple but well-fitting black leggings, a soft, fitted top that hugged her curves, her white hair damp and loose, cascading down her back like a waterfall. She paused mid-step, her hand still resting on the doorframe when she saw them. Kai, Nash, York. All three were standing in a perfect, silent line across from the washroom door, their shoulders squared, their expressions unreadable yet intensely focused. All three were just staring at her, an almost palpable sense of expectation in the air. Her brows lifted, a faint frown creasing her forehead. "Okay, what happened?" she asked, a playful note of exasperation in her voice. "Did someone die? Why are you all being weird?" Nash and York exchanged a quick, knowing glance. It was York, typically the more stoic of the two, who finally spoke, his voice low, filled with a newfound respect that bordered on awe. "Morning, Luna," Nash said, voice smooth and deliberate. Devin blinked once, then gave a low, theatrical bow hand over her chest, chin dipped just enough to be cheeky. "You're Luna reporting for duty, gentlemen." Nash chuckled, York smirked, and even Kai's lips pulled into the ghost of a grin. "Smartass," Nash muttered, shaking his head. "Born this way," she replied. rising to full height, shoulders square, eyes bright. And when her gaze met Kai's, steady and unflinching, neither of them looked away. Then, Kai stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached out, his large hands cupping her face gently, the touch firm yet incredibly tender. He lowered his head and kissed her softly on the forehead, letting his lips linger for a moment. It wasn't showy, it wasn't ceremonial, it wasn't a kiss of passion or possessiveness. It was something far deeper. It was reverent. It was real. It was an acknowledgement. "You're mine," he said softly, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, his voice a low rumble that resonated through her. "Whether you accept it or not, you are." Devin's heart gave a sudden, hard kick behind her ribs, a jarring beat in the quiet aftermath. The weight of his words, the depth of his gaze, the combined reverence of the three men standing before Harriet was overwhelming. A faint blush rose in her cheeks. "I just wanted a shower," she murmured, the words coming out as a breathless whisper, a last-ditch attempt at normalcy. Kai's grin widened, a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph in his eyes. "Too bad," he said, his voice laced with amusement and deep conviction. "You earned an empire." The traitor knelt in the courtyard where the smoke still clung to the air, held between Nash and York like a crumbling statue. His nose was broken, his lips split. Bruises bloomed across his face like rotten fruit, but his eyes? Still defiant, still stupid. Kai stood before him, hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. The rest of the Dominion had gathered warriors, healers, survivors of the Hollow Fang attack. The pups were safe now, tucked away in the care of those who remained behind. But they watched from windows, balconies, and ledges. Everyone would see. Everyone needed to see. This was no quiet execution in the woods. This was a lesson. Devin stood to the side, arms crossed, her body still aching, but her spine straight. She hadn't spoken a word since stepping out beside Kai. She didn't need to. She was the reason the compound still stood. And now, she'd witnessed the consequence of betraying it. The man tried to speak, a weak, pathetic mumble that died in his throat. Kai raised a hand, silencing him without a word, his gaze fixed on the traitor. The air tightened, heavy with expectation. Everyone knew why they were here. Then a ripple went through the crowd as Devin stepped forward, her eyes, usually a warm hazel, now shards of ice. She moved with an almost primal grace, stopping directly in front of the kneeling man. "Look at him." Devin's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear, carrying to every corner of the courtyard. A warrior, they called him. A man of the Dominion. But when the Alpha left, when the true wolves went to fight for our borders, what did this asshole do? Her lip curled in disgust. He coiled in the shadows, a cowardly snake, waiting for the moment he thought we were at our weakest. She paced once, glaring coldly into his eyes. He didn't face Kai. He didn't face the warriors. He waited until the compound was stripped bare, until only the pups and the weary remained. Her gaze burned into the traitor's bruised face. He thought with Kai gone, the compound would be easy prey. The last words were a low snarl, thick with the fury of a battle fought and won against impossible odds, a betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. She stood over him for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she stepped back, her eyes never leaving him, until she was once more beside Kai. The message was clear. Her part was done. Now, the Alpha would judge. Kai stepped forward, his earlier unreadable expression hardening into granite. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, vibrating with controlled power, far more dangerous than if he had roared. "You heard Luna. Every word of it is true. You opened our gates, not to protectors, but to predators. You unlocked the doors they could not breach, not with strength, but with perfidy. You endangered our pups, our mates, our very future. You endangered the Dominion." His gaze flicked to Devin and his enforcers, then back to the traitor, cold as a winter moon. He paused, allowing the weight of his accusation to settle over the silent throng. His gaze swept the crowd, holding each warrior's eye for a fraction of a second, a silent reaffirmation of their shared code. This is the Dominion. We bleed for each other. We fight for each other. We die for each other. And when one of our own turns his back, when he sells his kin for a whisper of power from our enemies, when he proves himself a spineless serpent who waits for the alpha's absence to strike, Kai leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper audible only to the traitor and those closest. Then he ceases to be one of us. He stood upright, his final decree echoing through the courtyard with the force of an oncoming storm. We feed him to the wilds. Nash and York hauled the man to his feet, his limbs unresponsive, as if he were already a puppet on severed strings. No cage. Kai's voice resonated. A death knell. No burial, no mercy. The crowd parted without a sound, a path opening, direct and unforgiving, to the outer gates. Not a whisper, not a cough, just a collective, stunned silence that spoke louder than any shout. Every eye was fixed on the condemned. The outer gates groaned open slowly, a sound like the earth itself sighing in dread, revealing the dense, untamed wild beyond. Territory crawling with true feral rogue wolves who lived by fang alone, forever hungry, forever merciless. York shoved the man forward, his dark eyes gleaming. You wanted freedom, a piece of the dominion? He said, his smile cold as bone. You got what you wanted, now run, you bastard. Fear broke through at last, cold, sharp, and undeniable, splintering what little defiance the traitor had left. He hesitated for a second, then, with a choked sob, he bolted, stumbling, limping, wheezing. He plunged into the shadowed depths of the wilderness. He didn't make it 50 yards. The first feral wolf descended on him from the trees with a sound like thunder, a blur of gray fur and snapping jaws, snarling fury. More followed, a wave of primal hunger. It was over in moments. A single choked scream tore through the air, abruptly cut short. Then, an absolute, profound silence descended, broken only by the distant, wet sounds of the kill. The pack watched, transfixed, their faces pale, a stark warning etched into their minds. Kai turned back to the pack. Let this be our warning to all who would open our gates to our enemies. His eyes found Devin's across the yard. They knew who had stood between the Dominion and ruin. Devin had fought, yes, but it wasn't just her. It was the strength of their own, the resilience of the pack, the bond that held them together even under fire. She had been one part of that, a vital part, but not the whole. That night, the war drums began. For the first time in decades, the Dominion gathered not for celebration, but for vengeance. Warriors sharpened blades, archers prepared quivers, scouts pored over territory maps, and blacksmiths laced new weapons in silver. Devin walked the perimeter in silence, the wind in her white hair, her pulse steady. No fear, no hesitation. Only fire. The Dominion moved like a beast reborn, ancient and terrible, awakened from a long slumber. Days had been spent in ritualistic preparation, not for a skirmish, but for a cleansing. In the pre-dawn gloom, deep within their hallowed grounds, the warriors had gathered. No celebratory drumming, no raucous boasts. Only the low murmur of ancestral chants, echoing prayers for strength, for ruthlessness, for the swift delivery of vengeance. Every warrior was clad in bespoke battle gear, black, pure leather that softened with every movement, yet offered formidable protection, reinforced with plates of dark, polished steel at the shoulders, chest, and shins. Each piece was custom fitted, a second skin, allowing for unparalleled agility. Blades, from the great two-handed war axes of the berserkers to the sleek, balanced daggers of the scouts, had been meticulously sharpened to a razor's edge, then kissed in silver, not for show, but for the bite it gave against the flesh of their enemies, a ritual purification of intent. And across the face of every wolf, alpha, elite, or blooded soldier was marked a bold slash of ash, mixed with the blood of a freshly chosen kill, a death mark, a vow of no quarter, a silent promise that only one side will walk away from this night. Kai stood at the vanguard, his presence a palpable force, silent, cold-eyed. His voice had given the command to prepare for war, a formal declaration, but the very air around him, heavy with the scent of ozone and impending storm, whispered extinction. His fur, even in his massive wolf form, seemed to drink the light, making him a void made flesh. Beside him stood Devin, armored now, her white hair braided in thick cords that spilled over her shoulders like woven ice, stark against the dark steel. Her twin daggers, named Ruin and Despair by the Dominion's blade masters, sat sheathed at her hips, their silvered hilts glinting faintly in the dying moonlight. When she walked, she moved with a predatory grace, a silent symphony of steel and resolve, like war given shape. Her face was set, devoid of all emotion save for a cold, burning purpose deep within her eyes. They rode together at the front kai, a black phantom, effortlessly devouring the forest path, her still human, silent, fire in her veins. Behind them, the Dominion followed in perfectly synchronized formations, their movements betraying no sound. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, reflecting the dim light like embers, pierced the gloom. Wolves snarled, deep, guttural rumbles that vibrated through the earth, yet made no sound beyond their ranks. Weapons glinted, 1,000 tiny flashes of malevolent promise. Hearts thundered, a synchronous drumbeat of inevitable fury. The air itself seemed to pulse with suppressed violence, thick and suffocating. The sky had turned dark, too early, too fast. A bruise spreading across the heavens, staining the stars, like even the sun didn't want to watch what was coming. The Hollow Fang encampment sprawled across the northern ridge, crude, sprawling mess of rough-hewn wood and scavenged stone, fires burning in scattered, unwatched pits, their lazy smoke drifting into the still night. Wolves lounged haphazardly, some sleeping, some playing, their guards lax, their instincts dulled by complacency. They were utterly unaware of the reckoning closing in on them like a silent, suffocating tide. They didn't see the first shadows melt from the deeper trees, indistinguishable from the encroaching night. Didn't hear the first soft, meticulously placed steps over the mossy, leaf-strewn forest floor. Not a twig snapped, not a stone displaced. They didn't sense the danger, the creeping dread, until the Dominion was already inside their carelessly kept perimeter. By then, it was far too late. The air shivered. A low, bone-deep rumble began to build. From the highest point of the ridge, Kai let out one howl. It wasn't a battle cry. It was the sound of earth tearing open, of a final judgment being cast. It bent the silence, splitting the sky like lightning, echoing through the valley, and seizing every Hollow Fang heart in a vice of icy terror, and the world ignited. The Dominion struck with a fury honed into discipline, a monstrous, coordinated machine. Blackwind wolves, massive and silent moments before, launched from the tree line like projectiles, dropping into tents and camps like blades from the heavens. The first sounds were muffled thuds, gurgles, the wet snap of bone. Then, as the true horror dawned, screams broke out, howls of raw alarm, of unadulterated pain, of sheer mind-numbing panic. Devin was in the thick of it, a white-haired wraith amidst the black-clad storm. Her dagger sang, twin whispers of death through air and blood. She ducked low beneath a flailing axe, the wind of its passage stirring her hair, before driving both blades into the side of a Hollow Fang warrior, twisting the steel to sever vital organs. The man choked, a geyser of crimson erupting from his lips. As she spun on her heel, already engaging the next two lunged, gutting him with a single, upward thrust that left him collapsing in a heap of twitching limbs. Blood sprayed her armor, a dark, warm rain. It coated her face, matted her hair. She didn't flinch. Her hands moved with terrifying precision, her heart a cold, steady drum against her ribs. All around her was chaos, but it was controlled, vicious chaos. Blackwind wolves moved in deadly coordination, a practiced ballet of brutality like they'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, each warrior knowing their role in the symphony of destruction. Tents ripped apart, revealing terrified faces that were instantly silenced. Campfires were kicked over, spreading flames that consumed canvas and wood with hungry crackles. She saw Nash barrel through a dense group of Hollow Fang, his wolf form massive and brutal, a moving wall of muscle and fur, jaws soaked in red, leaving a trail of broken bodies. Yorick was a blur of motion near the central fire pit, his enormous war axe slicing clean through bone with sickening wet thuds, roaring like the beast he truly was, his voice a primal thunder. Devin caught a hollow fang trying to flee through the tree-line young, terrified, his eyes wide with a desperate animal fear. She tackled him mid-stride, a burst of speed, pinning him beneath her knee with crushing force. "You chose the wrong pack," she hissed, her voice low and edged with venom. Her eyes burned not with pain, but with fury. "You came into our home. You threatened our young. You thought we'd break." She took a slow step forward. "But we don't break. We bury." Then she ended him with one clean, mercifully swift thrust. Her mercy was only for the speed of his death. Inside the enemy camp, the fires raged, fed by the dry wood and hastily abandoned possessions. Tents burned, their fabric shriveling and cracking like dry leaves. Wood crackled and snapped, spitting embers into the already choking air. Smoke poured into the night, thick and acrid, burning the eyes and lungs. The scent of fear was everywhere. It wasn't just the smell of smoke and blood. It was the pungent, metallic tang of raw terror, of piss and sweat. It coated the ground, seeped into the very earth. It clung to the skin, a cloying, inescapable stench. Hollow Fang didn't fight as a pack. They scrambled, lost in the sudden, overwhelming horror. They turned on each other in their panic, tripping, clawing, trying to find an escape that didn't exist. There was no honor, no cohesion, no command, just blood, just ruin, just the chilling, methodical advance of the Dominion. A burly brute tried to rush her with a crude sword in each hand, a feral growl ripping from his throat, something about Luna's neck on a pike. The words stoked the inferno in Devin's veins. She parried left, the clang of steel sharp and sudden, sliding beneath his wild swing, and drove both daggers upward into his ribs, piercing his heart and lungs in a single, brutal motion. He collapsed, mouth open in silent horror, his eyes locked on her in the last moment of his life, seeing not a woman, but an avenging spirit. She left him to bleed into the dirt, already moving, seeking her next kill. Then, from the ridge above, Kai howled again. A deeper, more resonant call this time, a signal for the final, crushing blow. The second wave followed, a fresh surge of Dominion warriors, howling their blood-curdling cries as they descended into the now burning, chaotic camp. Screams rose louder, more desperate. Devin stood in the center of it, her chest heaving, not from exertion but from the savage satisfaction. Her eyes, wild and alight with a primal fury, were covered in blood, reflecting the flickering flames of the dying encampment. A hollow fang warrior stumbled toward her, weaponless, his armor torn, his face a mask of pleading. His hands were raised, shaking. "No, wait! Wait, please!" he begged, his voice cracking, thick with terror. She didn't hesitate. The blade, clean of blood for a microsecond, flashed once in the firelight, slicing across his throat. He fell without another sound, his plea unfinished, his blood adding to the growing rivers on the ground. No mercy, none given, no quarter asked. The sky rumbled above, not with thunder, but with the distant echo of cries and the deep, satisfied snarls of the black wind. And somewhere in the heart of the collapsing, burning encampment, amidst the screams of the dying and the stench of their fear, the Hollow Fang finally understood. They hadn't been attacked. They hadn't even been challenged. They had, in their arrogance, called down Armageddon. And Armageddon came wearing the Black Wind crest. The last desperate snarls of the Hollow Fang warriors had died down, replaced by the guttural, triumphant cries of the Dominion. The fight, a brutal, relentless onslaught that had torn through the heart of their territory, was unequivocally over. Hollow Fang's camp, once a crude yet defiant stronghold, now lay in desolate ruins, shredded like forgotten skins, their support poles splintered, fires reduced to smoldering embers, and the very earth beneath, soaked crimson, bore silent witness to the carnage. Their warriors were either irrevocably dead, scattered like dust in the wind, or crawling into the deep, unforgiving shadows of the forest to bleed out alone, their last breaths a whisper. And at the very epicenter of this destruction, amidst the rising tendrils of smoke and the acrid scent of blood and burnt timber, stood the Dominion, They were not merely present, they were a towering, immovable force. Unshaken by the ferocity of the battle, unbroken by the cunning treachery leveled against them, they stood victorious, their forms silhouetted against the dying light of the setting sun, their power undeniable. From the swirling haze of smoke and dust, two figures emerged, moving with the heavy, purposeful tread of predators. It was Nash and York, the formidable enforcers of the Dominion, and between them they dragged a grotesque burden. The hollow fang Alpha Wansa, figure of proud, defiant leadership, a chieftain among his own, was now a broken, pitiful thing. His once regal fur was matted with grime and clotted blood, his body trembling uncontrollably, a pathetic shiver running through him despite the lingering warmth of the day. One side of his face was a swollen, pulpy mess, his lips split and gushing, and an arm dangled at an unnatural angle, clearly shattered. He was barely conscious, a fading spark of malevolence struggling against the encroaching darkness. They hauled him unceremoniously, dropping him with a sickening thud onto his knees before the awaiting figures of Kai and Devin. The Alpha coughed, a wet rattling sound, and a string of red foamy spittle landed in the dirt at his feet. With a defiant, yet utterly pathetic effort, he raised his head, his single uninjured eye a pinpoint of hatred and a desperate, baseless pride. Kai stood perfectly still, a silent, imposing monolith. His expression was a mask, unreadable, yet the sheer, crushing weight of his presence alone was enough to make the Hollow Fang Alpha flinch, a primal instinct of fear overriding his bravado. Devin, however, didn't wait. Impatient and furious, she stepped forward first movements, sharp, deliberate. Her eyes, usually a vivid crystal green, now burned like twin emerald blades, cold and unforgiving. And when she spoke, her voice cracked through the tension like a whip sharp, stinging, impossible to ignore. "You bastard!" she spat, the word laced with venom. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the Alpha's mangled lips, a flicker of his old arrogance. It was the wrong move. "You cowardly bastard!" she snarled, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble as she closed the distance between them. Fire seemed to emanate from her with every indignant breath she took. "You waited. You waited until our Alpha and our elite warriors were gone, thinking you were clever. You thought you could take the Dominion by gutting it from the inside, by burning our homes, by slaughtering our pups." Her voice rose with each accusation, echoing the outrage of every Dominion member present. Her lips, usually full and soft, curled into a cold, dangerous smile that promised only pain. "But you forgot something, didn't you?" The hollow Fang Alpha blinked slowly, a fresh drop of blood oozing from a gash above his brow, his single eye finally showing a flicker of comprehension. And then, dawning fear. Devin crouched slightly, bringing herself to eye level with the kneeling, broken man. Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering, intense. "Kai didn't leave us unguarded. He left me." The unspoken weight of her statement, the full measure of her power and responsibility, hung heavy in the air. She straightened slowly, a seamless, fluid motion, and from the concealment of her sleeve, a blade slid into her grasp. It was not overtly threatening, but its quiet emergence was a potent, chilling gesture of warning. "You thought you were clever. What you were was marked for extinction." Without another word, without a backward glance, she turned and stepped back, receding into the periphery. She had spoken her piece, delivered her judgment, and in doing so, she yielded the stage and the final, inevitable blow to her Alpha. It was a testament to their bond, their shared understanding, and the rigid hierarchy of their pack. Kai moved forward, calm and composed, each step deliberate. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a king surveying his territory, measured, watchful, controlled. Not like a warrior reveling in the wreckage, but like a force of nature steady in the storm, untouched by the chaos around him. "You didn't just breach our borders," he said, his voice a low, lethal hum that vibrated through the blood-soaked ground. There was no anger, no theatrics, just a chilling, absolute certainty. "You slaughtered innocents. You came for my people, my pack. You tried to take what wasn't yours. He began to circle the man, a slow, predatory orbit, like a wolf meticulously deciding where to deliver the fatal bite. The alpha's breath hitched, his trembling intensifying with each measured step Kai took. "I gave you a chance, years ago," Kai murmured, his voice almost conversational, yet imbued with a crushing weight of finality. "I let you keep your broken territory and your broken name. You should have stayed in your corner." The Hollow Fang Alpha desperately tried to speak, to beg, to defy, but his throat was too gravely injured. Only a guttural, wet gurgle escaped, followed by a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth. Kai leaned closer, his dark eyes boring into the Alpha's. "Your name dies here, your line ends now. The world will not remember Hollow Fang as a rival, a threat to be respected. It will remember it only as a stain we wiped clean." He straightened, his decision made, his resolve ironclad. York, the enforcer, ever vigilant, ever prepared, tossed Kai a blade. It spun end over end in the air, catching the last gleam of daylight on its silver-lined edge, its obsidian handle cool and deadly. Kai caught it with practiced ease, his grip firm. He didn't hesitate, not for a second. One clean, fluid motion. The blade arcs, impossibly fast, and then the Hollow Fang Alpha crumpled to the ground, a final pathetic gasp tearing through his punctured throat. His body went limp, utterly still, gone, expunged. The pack watched in a silence more profound than any roar. There were no cheers of triumph, no celebratory roars of victory. Only a vast, solemn respect. Only a deep, reverent awe for the unyielding justice of their Alpha. Devin approached Kai slowly, her boots crunching softly on the ash and spent casings that littered the ground. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers, a silent question passing between them. She nodded once, a gesture of affirmation, understanding. "That," she said quietly, her voice still tinged with a cold edge, "was for our pups. The vengeance was complete." Kai turned then, facing the gathered Dominion warriors, their faces grim but resolute in the fading light. He raised the silver-lined blade high above his head, letting it catch the last, lingering light of dusk. "This war is over," he growled, the words resonating with the primal power of an Alpha. "The threat is dead, extinguished. And if any pack, any territory, any living creature dares to question our strength again, let them dig through these ashes to find their answer." And as if on cue, 100 wolves howled behind him, a single, overwhelming voice. One pack, one unified force, one dominion, resolute and unbreakable. Their cry ripped through the night, a declaration of absolute dominance that would echo through the land for generations to come. The compound was silent. For the first time in weeks, no alarms, no howls, no screaming steel or blood in the air. Just the low crackle of a fire in Kai's quarters and the rhythm of two hearts beating in a room full of things unspoken. Devin stood barefoot near the hearth, wearing only one of his long black shirts. It fell to mid-thigh, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her white braid hung over one shoulder, undone at the ends, and her pale skin still bore faint reminders of war bruises in the shape of memories. Kai sat in the chair across from her, quiet, watching. She hadn't said anything when she came in after patrol, just kicked off her boots, peeled off her sweat-slicked clothes, and disappeared into the shower without a word. The water had run hot and steady, steam curling under the door like the sigh of something finally exhaling. When she emerged, hair damp, skin flushed, she wore one of his black shirts. The hem swayed with each step as she crossed the room barefoot, no armor, no shield, just her, and she looked at him, really looked at him, like she was seeing the man, not the Alpha. He rose slowly, crossed the room with deliberate steps, and stopped in front of her. They stood so close, she could feel the heat of his skin under the fabric of his shirt. "I just didn't want to be alone tonight." His eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders loosening as he stepped toward her. "You're not." A beat passed quiet, thick, unspoken. Then she looked up at him, steady and sure. Her eyes lifted to his. For once, neither of them wore titles. No Alpha, no Luna, just a man and a woman who had nearly died for each other. For a pack. For a future neither had asked for but both had built. "I want you," she said, steady and raw. For a second, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he reached out, cupped the side of her face with one rough hand, his thumb grazing the edge of her jaw like he couldn't believe she was real. "I've wanted you," he said quietly, "since the moment I saw you on that training ground at your old pack. Fierce, focused, kicking the hell out of that punching bag like it had insulted your bloodline." She almost smiled, but his voice dropped lower. "And then you turned and looked right at me. Like you knew." He stepped closer, his forehead brushing hers now. "I wanted you then," he murmured. "Not just because you were beautiful, gods. You were my snowfire. There was something in you I didn't recognize. Something ice. Something mine." Her breath hitched. She reached up, fingers grazing the faint scar near his collarbonian old mark, worn and pale. "Do I scare you?" she asked. He caught her hand gently, pressed it over his heart. "Only because I want you too much." And then finally they kissed. Not rushed, not hungry, real. His lips found hers like a prayer, her breath catching as her hand slid up his chest, tangling in the soft fabric of his shirt, then finding the warm skin beneath. He pulled her against him, slow and sure, letting her feel every inch of strength held barely in check. His body was a wall of heat and solid muscle, a comforting anchor after weeks of turmoil. She leaned into him, letting the tension in her frame unravel, her bruised muscles releasing their desperate clench. He picked her up, her legs wrapping instinctively around his waist, and carried her to the bed. He lowered her gently onto the furs, his weight settling over her, not crushing, but grounding. Their mouths never broke apart. Clothes came off between kisses, quiet, reverent, almost nervous. Not because of fear, but because this wasn't about dominance or urgency. It was about knowing. Tracing scars, learning softness. His rough hands brushed the hem of his shirt up over her thighs, the fabric a whisper against her skin as he peeled it away, his gaze never leaving hers. She helped him, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, pulling it open to reveal the hard planes of his chest, the faint scars that mapped his battles. As his shirt joined hers on the floor, their bare skin met, a gasp escaping her lips at the sudden, breathtaking heat. They made love on his bed, the furs warm beneath them, the fire painting gold across their skin. Orange light danced on the curves of her hips, the strong lines of his back. He kissed every inch of her like she was made of something sacred, a whispered prayer against her collarbone, a lingering brush of lips over the faint bruises on her arms. Each tender touch an apology for the world's cruelty, a promise of his protection. His tongue traced the delicate curve of her ear, sending shivers through her, making her arch into him. She touched him like she already knew him, like his body wasn't a mystery but a promise. Her hands roamed over the ridges of his abs, the broad expanse of his shoulders, the muscled strength of his thighs. She explored the texture of his skin, the beat of his heart thrumming beneath her palm, the subtle scent of him that was uniquely Kayarth and something wild and clean. Her kisses were just as reverent, mapping the line of his jaw, the pulse throbbing at his throat, the strong column of his neck. They explored each other with a slow, deliberate curiosity, as if mapping a future together, each touch a brushstroke on a canvas of unspoken devotion. They whispered, soft sounds, low murmurs of want, and a burgeoning love. "Beautiful," he breathed against her skin, making her tremble. "Mine," she whispered back, a fierce possessiveness she hadn't known she harbored. They laughed quietly when nerves got in the way, soft, breathy chuckles that eased the last vestiges of tension, bringing them closer still. Each movement was deliberate, weighted with meaning, every touch a language they were learning together. And when he moved inside her for the first time, it was like breathing again after drowning. A slow, careful press, a deep sigh from them both as their bodies aligned, a perfect fit, not conquest, not duty, just home. Devin arched into him, a soft moan escaping her lips as he filled her, the sensation overwhelming in its tenderness and power. He paused then, letting them both adjust, letting the exquisite pleasure of their union sink in, his forehead resting against hers. Their eyes met, wide with shared wonder, and he began to move, a slow, hypnotic grinding of their bodies. The rhythm built, unhurried, and deep, pushing them further into the exquisite spiral of sensation. His hips rocked against hers, a primal dance that was both ancient and utterly new. Their lips found each other again, their kisses deep and hungry, full of the passion they had held back for so long. She wrapped her legs tighter around his waist, pulling him deeper, wanting more, needing all of him. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, her nails scraping lightly over his heated skin as her breath came in ragged gasps. He leaned down, burying his face into her neck, sucking lightly on the sensitive skin there, making her shudder. Each thrust was a declaration, every moan a promise. The sounds in the room were raw and real, the soft slap of skin, the low moans that escaped their throats, the rustle of furs. The firelight flickered, painting shadows and gold across their intertwined limbs as their movements grew more urgent, more desperate. Devin cried out softly, a sound of pure pleasure, as a wave of sensation crashed over her. Kai groaned, a deep, guttural sound from his chest, his body tensing, pushing into her one final, powerful time. Her body clenched around him, sending him over the edge with her. "Devin," he rasped, his voice rough with emotion, his climax echoing hers as they both came together, a shuddering, earth-shattering release that left them breathless and intertwined. Afterward, he collapsed onto her, his weight comfortable and heavy, before rolling slightly to his side, pulling her with him. She curled into his side, her head nestled against his chest, her fingers trailing along his jaw, over the faint stubble. His arm wrapped securely around her, holding her close, like she was something sacred, something precious he had finally found. The fire continued its low crackle, the only sound apart from their slowing heartbeats. "Still think I'm too much for the Dominion?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep and contentment. He kissed her brow, then her temple, then the curve of her jaw. "I think you are the Dominion," he whispered, his lips lingering. "You are the heart of it. Everything that matters." She smiled, a soft, sleepy curve of her lips that he felt against his chest. She fell asleep with his heartbeat under her ear, safe for the first time in forever, knowing, truly knowing, that she was profoundly loved. And Kai, holding her close, knew he had finally found his home. The full moon burned, a colossal pearl in the velvet tapestry of the night sky, above the sacred glade. The air, crisp with the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the distant, sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine, vibrated with an ancient anticipation. Torches, strategically placed around the clearing, cast dancing shadows that stretched and swayed like silent sentinels, their flickering flames painting the faces of the gathered Dominion in hues of gold and amber. The rustle of wind through the ancient oaks was the only sound for long moments, a hushed whisper that seemed to carry the very breath of the forest. The pack, reverent and still, formed a perfect, unbroken circle, their collective gaze fixed on the center, where the ritual was about to unfold. Each wolf present was a pillar of silence, their hearts beating in unison, a silent drumbeat marking the rhythm of this sacred night. At the heart of the glade, Kai waited. He was a stark silhouette against the torchlight, clad in ceremonial black, a color that seemed to absorb the light, making him appear carved from the very shadows. His posture was regal, powerful, yet there was a tremor of something deeper, anticipation perhaps, or a rarely seen vulnerability in the set of his broad shoulders. And then she stepped into the ring. Every wolf present, from the oldest elder to the youngest pup, drew an involuntary breath, then fell into a silence so profound it seemed the very glade held its breath. Devin moved with an ethereal grace, a vision in soft gray. Her dress, cut to flow with her movements, boasted intricate silver embroidery that shimmered like captured starlight across its hem, and the daring slit that climbed high on her side, hinting at the strength beneath. Her hair, usually confined, was loose tonight, a cascade of white waves tumbling over her shoulders, catching the moonlight and glinting like spun silver. She was not merely beautiful. She was the embodiment of the moon itself, a luminous presence among the shadows. Kai met her with his hand extended, a gesture of both invitation and profound respect. Their fingers intertwined, a perfect fit, their touch sending a subtle tremor through the silent glade. They stood before the eldest elder, a figure of profound wisdom whose eyes held the history of their people. The elder raised both hands to the sky, acknowledging the celestial witness, and his voice, ancient and resonant, began the rite. "You come as Alpha and Luna," the elder's voice boomed, echoing through the glade, "bound by title, by destiny. But tonight, you come to bind not by destiny alone, but by choice. Before the moon, our eternal mother, before the pack, your unwavering kin, before each other, heart to soul." Kai turned to her, his gaze unwavering, deep as the night itself. The strength he projected was immense, yet softened by an undeniable tenderness meant only for her. "I choose you, Devin," he began, his voice a low rumble, raw with emotion. "Through storm and shadow, through blood and bond, you are my strength, my anchor in chaos. You are my Luna, my light in the dark. You are my mate, my soul's true north, now and for all eternity." His thumb caressed her knuckles, a silent promise. Devin's lips curved into a smile, a rare, unarmored expression that transformed her face. It was not the sharp, wry smirk she wore like a shield, but something honest, warm, and radiant from the depths of her being. Her eyes, usually so guarded, shone with an exquisite vulnerability only he had ever truly seen. "I choose you, Kai," she replied, her voice soft but unwavering, filled with an equal, powerful conviction. "Through war and quiet, through fire and frost, you are my alpha, the unwavering pillar. You are my fury when I falter, and my calm when the world burns. You are my protector, my partner, my everything. My life, my love, my future are irrevocably bound to yours." The elder nodded once, a ripple of approval passing through the silent pack. "Seal it." Kai leaned in, his eyes never leaving hers, and his lips claimed hers in a kiss that was deep, slow, and utterly consuming. Their wolves, awake and humming beneath their skin, surged with recognition, a primal melody of belonging. He drew back just an inch, his gaze dropping to her neck, and he kissed her there, passionately, possessively. The warmth of his lips, the gentle drag of his teeth, lit a fire through her veins, a thrilling jolt that weakened her knees, igniting a primal need to be consumed by him. He bit, a slight pressure, not with violence, but with an overwhelming surge of love and desire that made her tremble, utterly lost in the sensations. Then he kissed the mark, a tender claim that left her breathless, trembling with a wanting that shook her to her core. She returned the mark, a powerful, reciprocal claim. Her lips brushed the base of his throat, her breath warm against his skin. Then, with a boldness that was uniquely Devin, she caressed his ear gently with the tip of her tongue, a spark igniting in his eyes, his body tensing, on fire with desire. She bit him, a soft, deliberate pressure that sealed their wolves together not with ceremony, but with unadulterated passion. This was not a formal sealing, it was a hungry, feverish claim, a burning declaration that transcended ancient rites, born of the raw, undeniable need that consumed them both. As their marks were made, a shimmering aura, like spun moonlight, rippled between them, a silent testament to the powerful, intrinsic bond forming, weaving their very spirits together. They stood there for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, the air thick with their shared heat, the taste of each other still on their lips. When they finally parted, it was a gentle separation, but the desire remained, a palpable current beneath the surface. Then, as one, the pack howled. It was not merely a celebration, but a solemn promise, a chorus of deep, guttural sounds that resonated through the glade, echoing the unbreakable connection forged before them. It was a vow to follow, to protect, to believe in the bond that had just woven itself, unyielding, effectively forging a dynasty from a union of power. The Dominion was reborn, stronger than ever, its future illuminated by the love of its Alpha and Luna. Back in their private chambers, the world outside faded into nothingness. The soft glow of embers in the hearth painted their skin in warm hues as they shed their ceremonial clothes, not with haste, but with a delicious anticipation. There was no need for words, only understanding. Their bodies, finely tuned instruments of desire, found each other with a primal urgency. Moans, soft and deep, filled the room, mingling with the sounds of skin meeting skin, the rhythmic grinding of their bodies, a dance of pure love and unbridled passion. Twice they came together, each time a deeper plunge into the exquisite delirium of their union, their souls intertwining with every thrust, every gasp. The love that had been growing between them, the raw lust that now consumed them, the unshakable certainty that they had found their other half, all coalesced into a symphony of pleasure and profound connection. Their bodies moved as one, a whirlwind of want and surrender, each touch, each kiss, each breath, a reaffirmation of their unwavering bond. And Kai, a man of restraint and quiet power, never given to overt displays of affection, took her hand in his. He pressed a final, tender kiss to her knuckles, soft, slow, and absolutely theirs, a gesture that spoke volumes of his devotion. Devin, looking at him, smiled, not as the fierce warrior or the guarded Luna, but as a woman deeply loved, utterly cherished, and chosen above all others. Together, bound by moonlight and by a passion that burned brighter than any flame, they were the Dominion. That's the end of this tale, but in the world of the supernatural, there's always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there's more waiting for you. Just check out the other audiobooks on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and brave and never stop listening.